Chapter 867. The others in the conference room could not see Cadman's face. Most of them were still immersed in the joyous atmosphere caused by the absurdity. However, there were still some people like Hood, who was not part of the negotiation. Hence, he did not sit at the side of the table. Instead, he followed his professional habits and stood in the corner of the conference room, approximately to the right behind Cadman. At that moment, he saw Cadman extend his right hand to the side of his body and fling it continuously in an unnatural manner. Under such circumstances, the sudden bright color of the flame became exceptionally strange. As a normal person, there would always be a period of adaptation to changing from one mental state to another that was contrary to that mental state. Hood hesitated for 2 seconds. Finally, he walked forward quickly to ask about the situation. However, when he was just 1 step away, Cadman's fling movement suddenly became 10 times more intense. It was like an intense punch. Hood's sensitivity was far beyond that of an ordinary person. He made the most accurate response. Relying purely on the strength of his waist and abdomen, he bent his upper body backward and slid his feet at the same time. The fist wrapped in blood-red flames was almost swung at his chin. Hood could even hear the sound of the air being burned, as well as some indistinct and chaotic noises mixed in. Cries of surprise rang in the conference room. There was also the sound of tables and chairs scraping against the floor. Some people stood up, while others froze on the spot. However, they were all clearly frightened. The joyous atmosphere from before collapsed in an instant. In the next second, Hood pulled away from Cadman and shouted sternly, "Cadman!" Cadman did not respond. After throwing that punch, he seemed to have lost control of his body. He staggered a step and turned his body sideways. His left hand moved horizontally and pressed down on his right shoulder. This was his most instinctive reaction. At that moment, the blood-red flames that were blowing on his right hand had already broken through the boundary of his wrist. They were rapidly spreading towards his arm and even closer to his torso. The strange thing was that the flames had clearly scorched the air and even raised the surrounding temperature. However, the surface of Cadman's body was still relatively intact. It was only soaked in a thick dark red color. Even the clothes on his arm were not damaged at all. Instead, it made his face look even paler. In such a situation, it was impossible to tell what was real and what was fake. It was as if some inherent nature had been distorted by some kind of power. "What did you do?" The sudden change in the conference room was clearly transmitted to the passenger terminal through the remote video. Go-to Masayoshi's muffled voice rang out. There wasn't much righteous indignation from being bound together against a common enemy, but more of surprise, as well as a strange sense of excitement. Go-to Masayoshi kept staring at Mr. Mo. In the shortest amount of time, to gather enough useful information was his mission, even his destiny. Therefore, to him, he wasn't afraid of Mr. Mo making a move. The state that he was in earlier was the most unacceptable, but even if he made a move, it didn't feel any different? After the previous round of observation, Go-to Masayoshi had already faintly noticed that Mr. Mo seemed to be wearing a thick and heavy cloak at all times. Of course, this was only a description of Mr. Mo's marvelous pattern of concealing the operation of his extraordinary power, or perhaps this pattern itself was the external representation of the operation of his extraordinary power. Go-to Masayoshi judged that Mr. Mo's core secrets were all hidden under this cloak. This thing was so thick and wide, airtight, hiding everything tightly. Even if a corner was occasionally lifted up, what could be seen would be chaotic and blurry, without any discernible silhouette. Under this kind of situation, no one knew whether Mr. Mo under the cloak was naked, or wearing armor, or perhaps inside was simply an arsenal that defied normal space-time logic. That's right, it was this cloak that formed a kind of black box sealed with special rules, isolating the outside world from prying. What was shown was merely the result, for example, welcome, and the like. just like the electric wheelchair and Ian Lowe who passed through consecutively just now. Or perhaps right now. Was it really Mr. Mo's method? Specious, this was very annoying. Towards Goto Masayoshi's inquiry or confirmation, Mr. Mo didn't have any response. His expression didn't change either, only maintaining a look of interest. He rubbed his chin, as if watching a movie, watching the image transmitted back from thousands of miles away. Instead, Ian Lowe, who was behind him, seemed to have lost control of her expression. She had already unconsciously opened her mouth, looking a little sluggish. Returning to the axis of chaos, there was no doubt that Cadman was still in pain. In terms of his mental state, his change was more intense than anyone else's. The direct, inexplicable, and even unreasonable threat impact shook his will in the most direct manner. At this moment, from the angle he was standing at, other than Hood, no one else could see his face clearly. But regardless of whether it was in the conference room or the passenger terminal thousands of miles away, everyone could see that this originally handsome man's cheeks and muscles were currently distorted like a monster. Perhaps it was precisely because of the compression of these muscles, Cadman let out a completely different scream. "Let go of me!" His next move was basically about to tear off his entire right arm, but the bloody flames steadily and resolutely spread over his shoulder, burning his neck, torso, and head. Along the way, it also ignited his originally intact left hand. Hood displayed the decisiveness of an operation team leader. He exhaled and shouted, forming his right hand into a knife hand and slashed down towards Cadman's abdomen. The air where his fingertips and forearm touched was clearly distorted, as though it was covered in a layer of invisible flames. The format of fire. Although he was shocked by the scene before him for 3 seconds, Hood's follow-up reaction was still the fastest. He quickly made a judgment that this was inextricably linked to Cadman's use of the violent flame seal to mobilize the power of blood and fire. As it turned out, this was a foolish act that provoked the Blood Flame Order's authority. But first, the connection between the two had to be severed. Hood's individual strength was certainly not at the level where he could contend against the fundamental strength of the Blood Flame Order. But the instant he made his move, all the members of the operation team inside and outside the conference room instantly synchronized under the drive of the 7th-generation dynamo core. They jointly constructed a tight, formatted space, and formed the greatest support for Hood's hand blade that his physical body could withstand. This was already the strongest attack that Hood could unleash while not wearing his armor. The clothes on Cadman's chest silently tore open, and the lower half fell down, exposing the muscles of his chest and abdomen, as well as the blood-colored flames that were burning on it. And in that 1 second, or maybe half a second, the fiery tail of the flames was pressed down. It was indeed pressed down, but that was all. Time passed by another time, and the blood-colored flames once again began to expand wantonly. The format of fire, which was known to be able to format all extraordinary powers in the world, didn't play its intended role. Hood felt as though his knife hand had cut into a layer of thick cloth that was soaked in water. Most of the power had already dissipated in the distorted and chaotic structure before it could make contact. Cadman screamed once more. Completely at a loss, he instinctively flung his left hand that had just come into contact with the flames. He wanted to fling the flames away, but it was all in vain. The speed at which the blood-colored flames spread wasn't particularly fast, but as long as they came into contact with it, they wouldn't be extinguished. At that moment, Cadman's entire upper body had already been completely covered by the blood-colored flames, including his entire head. The corners of his eyes had already burst open. What splashed out wasn't blood, but like the residue of burning plastic. There were even more flames flickering in and out of the other orifices of his 5 senses. No one knew what Cadman was feeling at that moment. The seemingly harmless flames brought him unimaginable pain. But it was very obvious that Cadman's mental barrier had already been burned to ashes. He began to shout frantically, "Let me go! I beg you. God. Spareem. Hood's fingertips were a little numb. This was most likely due to the interference of his emotions. Had the direct contact, just now, attracted the demonic fire over? In the depths of his thoughts, there was no doubt that there was fear and dread. This made Hood's mood even worse. Driven by his emotions, he was desperate. He roared in the direction of the projection, "Jimmy, damn it, why are you guys just standing there? Do you think you're useful?" The emotional shout made most of the people at the passenger terminal turn their gazes to Captain Jimmy, who had been berated. In the blink of an eye, he became the center of attention, but Captain Jimmy's reaction was unexpected. He didn't speak. He didn't communicate. He didn't act against Mr. M.O., who was just inches away from him, as Hood had hoped. Instead, he followed his earlier trend and retreated, his speed increased explosively. It was also at this moment that a cold and hard mechanical voice came out of nowhere. "Warning, your actions have already constituted a first-degree intentional murder using extraordinary power. Please immediately stop and deal with it harmlessly. Otherwise, we will take action." The sudden and strange warning caused everyone to be somewhat distracted. And at this moment, Captain Jimmy had already swept past Goto Masayoshi and the veteran from the back. He used their bodies as cover to increase the distance between him and Mr. M.O. Then, he crashed heavily into the front section of a parked flying car. The clack of the mechanical parts disassembling and reattaching did not stop. The outer shell of the crashed car seemed to come alive. It transformed into a set of metal components and gathered around Captain Jimmy's body. It instantly formed a set of exoskeleton armor, arming him to the teeth. Captain Jimmy looked like he was coming over empty-handed. In fact, he had his deep blue walker exoskeleton follow him in a stealthy state. It could be upgraded to its strongest state at any time. Even before Captain Jimmy's transformation, the moment Captain Jimmy began to retreat and the mechanical voice sounded its warning, there was a bang from the surface of the lake near the shore. 2 water pillars exploded and 2 fully armed deep blue walkers leapt out of the water's surface. Because their synchronization rate was too high, the 2 splashing sounds seemed to merge into one. The ice storm machine cannon in their hands had long since locked onto Mr. M.O. in the wheelchair and began to preheat and idle. The special physical ammunition built inside was specially designed to deal with the powerful interference power of spiritual-type ability users. It sprayed out in a form similar to a metal storm. Coupled with the support of the formatting domain, it could instantly tear apart a B-rank spiritual-type ability user. After the preheating was complete, Captain Jimmy was fully armed. The automatic mechanical sound also came to an end. Captain Jimmy had no intention of playing it again. He directly issued an attack order through the 7th-generation Dynamo Core and the Apocalypse Array it was linked to. This was the mission he had to complete as the high-level thug of the Amaterasu Order. As for the cause and effect, as well as the meaning behind it, none of it was within the scope of his consideration. The only extra thing he had to do was to give himself a layer of insurance. It was at this moment that Captain Jimmy once again felt a stuffy and astringent feeling assaulting his face. It felt somewhat familiar, just like when he had bumped into Mr. M.O. today. It felt like a thick wet cloth had been thrown over his nose and mouth. Wait a minute. He was already under the protection of the deep blue walker exoskeleton. In the next second, a violent shock attacked him. The Apocalypse Array system operating at high speed indicated that the automatic defense function of the sound wave weapon had been activated. It also automatically judged and simultaneously activated the infrasonic wave defense structure. If necessary, it could be activated at the first instance. At the end of last year, when the entire system was still in the experimental stage, it had specially added a targeted plug-in module. For a moment, Captain Jimmy thought that this slightly redundant module was about to be used, but reality proved that he was thinking too much. But on a certain level, his imagination was far from enough. At this moment, the passenger terminal at the shore of Northern Mountain Lake had indeed been attacked by a terrifying noise. The explosive sound wave shock was like a passing storm, engulfing the 100 or so people on the passenger terminal in one go. At this moment, 99% of the people showed signs of either high or low levels of mental confusion. But the deep blue Walker defense was effective, and the two powerful attackers weren't affected at all. The ice storm gun barrel had already begun to spit out ammunition. But right in front of the gun barrel that was rotating at high speed, two flesh and blood creations that resembled giant palms inexplicably appeared. One on each side, extremely symmetrical. The gun barrel had already locked onto its target, but it was forcefully lifted up by the two monstrous giant claws that were wrapped in scales. The powerful kinetic energy of the physical ammunition certainly pierced through them in an instant, but the upward momentum didn't decrease. Flesh and scales splattered everywhere, and the follow-up ammunition had long since flown off to who knew where. The well-trained, powerful attackers wanted to make adjustments at the first instance, but the turbulence in the void rushed back and forth. This time, it suddenly leapt to the next level, transforming into a violent and restless mental storm. A series of disturbances and attacks, from incorporeal to tangible, from material to mental, seemed chaotic and complicated, but they converged and integrated into a common source, and then focused to form an explosive point. The lake water that struck the breakwater exploded with a rumble, and a considerable portion of it evaporated into water vapor in midair. The blood-colored flames cut it into fragments until it completely evaporated. It was in this space where water, light, and fire interweaved that a malevolent creature whose entire body was dark red like blood appeared with a roar. It seemed to have rushed up from the bottom of the lake, but its specific trajectory was indistinct. Following the appearance of the vicious creature, the impact of the single-point explosion increased explosively by more than 10 times. Even Captain Jimmy's mind sank a little. The two powerful attackers who had received the direct impact of the mental storm were in a much worse state. A suffocating gap allowed the pair of giant palms that were already badly mangled to fiercely slap the exoskeleton armor, sending them flying away at the same time. Fortunately, before the battle, the team had already completed the connection between the mental and physical plane in advance, realizing the interference and connection between the mental plane and the material plane, creating a tightly formatted space that could jointly bear and divert the external impact. The two people who were hit didn't show any serious injuries. But in this way, the previous ambush-killing move was all a joke. Captain Jimmy cursed. He wanted to attack again, but when he looked at the vicious creature that suddenly appeared by the lake, he was a little stunned. The vicious creature was huge, with long arms and a tortoise's back, almost in the shape of an ape. Although it was habitually hunched, just the body that appeared on the surface of the water was already more than 3 meters, and even so, there was still a section below its thigh that was below the water surface. Its entire body was covered with bulging muscles and dense scales. As it rose and fell like it was breathing, the heat on its body was like a bloody light, like a flame, and it felt like the surrounding water was about to boil. And it was precisely this vicious creature, or perhaps because Mr. M.O. who was near the shore felt that it was blocking too much light, so he scolded it. This enormous creature then obediently shrunk its body, curling into a ball and pressing down into the lake, only leaving its neck and shoulders above. It just happened that its huge head passed over the fence, and visually, it was already about the same size as Mr. M.O. who was in a wheelchair. Separated by Mr. M.O., Goto Masayoshi carefully observed the vicious creature. In the depths of the dim yellow eyeball, the layers of light became more and more complex, the level of power that was being used also became more and more profound. This caused a huge pressure on his body, causing the blood vessels and tendons around his eye sockets to bulge, especially the temples on both sides. It was almost like a dense net. So ugly. Jiang Zhong, who was very close, seemed to be affected by the sound wave attack. He actually didn't feel any fear, and only muttered his evaluation. The target was a little vague, but they were all suitable, causing the veteran and Ao Ping Rong to look at him. But at this moment, the most eye-catching was still the ugly monkey, and the most important person beside him. From start to finish, Mr. Mo, who was in a wheelchair, did not move at all. Actually, most of the people on the pier were the same, it was just that the others did not have time to move. As for him, Mr. Mo's gaze was focused on the projected area. He looked quite serious, to the point that he didn't seem to care much about Captain Jimmy's death trap. The people who had just caught their breaths unconsciously followed his gaze, and once again turned their attention to the conference room thousands of miles away. In front of the camera, Cadman, at some point, was already stuck there, his knees bent and his spine curled, his left and right arms half raised, bent into a stiff angle, as if he had raised his hands to surrender, but his crazed raised head made it look more like a prayer of failure. Burp! A strange sound similar to a burp came from the ugly monkey's enormous cranial cavity. The pipe that made the sound was the area on his face equivalent to the mouth and nose. There were no obvious organs there, only dark purple and wrinkled flesh. It felt like a piece of rotten meat. There were a few intermittent openings in the middle. They were all opening up, squeezing out saliva pus. It was more like the sticky lava flowing out of the cracks of a volcano, black and red interweaved, burning the air, about to fall but not yet. On the other side, Goto Masayoshi, who had been observing all this time, suddenly had a twitch in his temple, he noticed. On that lava saliva, the scattered fire-pattern cracks faintly pieced together to form a face. And it was getting clearer and clearer, more and more definite. In the projected area, the image of Cadman, who had already turned into a burning statue, became more and more similar, reflecting each other. Chapter 868. It was indeed Cadman. While the two groups of people were separated by thousands of kilometers, most of them could only rely on the visual similarity, as well as the logical reasoning of the situation. Goto Masayoshi had already used his special ability to find conclusive evidence. Although from the perspective of mutual interference, the outline of the human figure in the lava saliva had already been changed beyond recognition by the violent aura of the ugly monkey. But as long as one could grasp the most essential core inside, and then follow the cause and effect to push back, one could basically complete the restoration. That guy Cadman had a physical body, so he was originally unable to achieve the effect of spirit leaving body. But Mr. Mo had also considered this point, and used the lava saliva to create a temporary container, which could also be called a cage, to absorb his soul body over, and also achieved a rather complete reflection. If Cadman didn't mind, it wouldn't be a problem to use that saliva as a body. Goto Masayoshi saw through some things, but the price he had to pay was severe physical discomfort. His eye sockets were burning hot, the dim yellow eyeball was slightly pulsating, bringing up the eyelids and the surrounding blood network, forcing them to increase the speed of blood supply in order to offset the loss of special vision. Goto Masayoshi was really having a hard time. The miraculous actions of the eyeball had already exceeded the upper limit of his consciousness control. What was worth rejoicing was that this effort had obtained corresponding results, and he had also discovered even more. In Goto Masayoshi's eyes, the current projection area was like a demonic mirror. It only reflected the most important part, and then made absurd distortions to all other elements. On both sides of this mirror, no matter whether it was the two parties in the T-City conference room who were closely related to Cadman, or the heavenly people, who were purely there to support, in a sense, had already unified and mutated into a kind of low-level existence. The number of these people, and the difference in their appearance, seemed to no longer have any practical meaning. If one had to forcefully come up with a meaning, it would probably be equivalent to raw materials. People could not believe in the correlation between both sides of the mirror, but this mirror was simultaneously reflecting the panic and fear in their hearts, and it was vividly displayed. These negative emotions that had been detonated and multiplied continuously were being transformed into a special form of existence on the mental level, or perhaps in the deeper realm, and were communicating with Mr. Mo. Limited by his own level and comprehension. Goto Masayoshi was unable to understand too much. He could only make a superficial description. It was roughly like the pervasive dirty smoke, moving through the gaps between the slight lifting of the heavy cloak. Of course, the smoke leaked out, but the process only happened in an invisible place, in the black box, deep within the cloak that was difficult to observe. Over there seemed to be a demon enjoying this special ingredient. It was eating clouds and spitting out smoke in a leisurely manner. And when Goto Masayoshi wanted to pry a step further, what should be sealed was still sealed, what should be chaotic was still chaotic. It shouldn't be. Separated by thousands of miles, the consumption of the tyrannical and terrifying soul absorption wasn't enough to affect the cloak's concealment effect? Or could it be that Mr. Mo's level of control over the blood flame order's fundamental power, as well as the corresponding techniques, allowed him to ignore the obstruction of spacetime and casually manipulate a high-ranking member of the order like Cadman? If that was the case, Mr. Mo's control over the blood flame order was simply unimaginable. With the existence of such a controller, Madame Halder, as the officiator, was truly purely used for sacrificial purposes. Oh, it couldn't be that the sacrificial object would be Goto Masayoshi, who had forcefully peaked at this level, was reduced to the level of most people, who could only use their poor imagination to make conjectures. At this time, he especially hoped that Captain Jimmy's hand could be a bit more forceful than before, or at the very least, create a bigger gap in the cloak. But the current Captain Jimmy seemed to have been frightened by his thwarted operation. Even though his entire body was covered in armor and his face couldn't be seen, his body showed an obvious sense of stiffness, as if his soul had left his body. Jimmy-kun, still no results? Somewhat unexpectedly, when Goto Masayoshi called out to Captain Jimmy, the latter also contacted him through the preset communication channel. "Did you see anything? That monster." "What?" "I'm talking about that ugly monkey, that largest ape-like creature." "So what?" Captain Jimmy's mood clearly fluctuated. "Damn it, have you been scared silly? It's right there, and you're telling me, so what? Don't tell me you're only looking at its drool?" Goto Masayoshi stared blankly. That's right, such a large mutant was right in front of him. Why didn't he pay attention to it, and instead was only interested in the drool that this guy dripped? Even though that was also a very important part. The ape-like creature right in front of him was clearly an extremely powerful mutant. For Mr. Mo to be able to summon it out of nothing, the interference, the consumption, was probably even greater than the long-distance soul-sucking activity under the rules of the order. He actually didn't think of something that was clearly in front of him? Goto Masayoshi faintly felt that it was a bit strange, and felt that Captain Jimmy's mood was too abnormal. He subconsciously asked, "What did you see?" This thing. You don't know? Damn it, don't tell me you don't have the slightest idea." Should I know? Goto Masayoshi was truly a bit confused. He indeed didn't have any related concept. At this moment, it was as if there was a piece of information that everyone knew, but it was perfectly missed by him. As a social creature, this kind of feeling was terrible, but this also stimulated his curiosity to an even greater degree. The focus of Goto Masayoshi's gaze naturally spread away from that lump of lava saliva that was about to fall and expanded to the related area around it, that enormous and ugly face that seemed to have half rotted. The focus of his gaze constantly adjusted, sweeping past the fine scales on the ugly monkey's face, the half-caved-in forehead and crown, the wrinkled flesh, and finally made contact with its protruding crimson eyes. Large and empty. This was Goto Masayoshi's first feeling. But for some reason, he didn't dare to explore further into the depths of the hollow. In reality, at this moment, the frequency and amplitude of his eyelids twitching had increased dramatically. His eyelids that were especially loose due to his emaciation couldn't help but droop, but were stimulated by his eyeballs and bounced back again. The current Goto Masayoshi seemed to be looking directly at a dazzling light source, looking directly at the sun that was about to rise above and below the horizon. Completely out of instinct, Goto Masayoshi wanted to turn his face away to avoid a direct attack. He indeed completed this action, but what was truly moving was only his neck and head. In his eye sockets, the pair of dim yellow eyeballs didn't move. On the contrary, they even pushed open the eyelids that they were trying to cover, and controlled all the related nerves, blood vessels and muscles, staring fixedly at that ape-like creature's ugly face, especially the large and empty bloody eyes, motionlessly. The dazzling feeling continued to spread over. If it was a normal person, they might have already started crying non-stop. But Goto Masayoshi didn't, because even if the tears were about to flow out, they would still be used by the dim yellow eyeballs as lubricant, better than nothing. Goto Masayoshi's heartbeat suddenly sped up. Part of it was due to the fluctuation of emotions caused by losing control, but the other part, which was also an even more important factor, was that the eyeballs needed more blood supply, more nutrition. Goto Masayoshi's body was heating up, but the pores on his skin were abnormally contracting. It was precisely under such a contradictory reaction that even more energy from his limbs and bones were mobilized, rushing upwards in the most efficient manner for the eyeballs to use. Other than that, there was also the endless sunlight from the outside world. At this moment, Mr. Mo's voice sounded again, as if he was talking to Yin Lo. "Did you see it clearly?" "Ah, what?" Yin Li's reaction was similar to Goto Masayoshi and Captain Jimmy. Half a second later, she came back to her senses and asked, what exactly is this thing?" "A type of wondrous creation that I discovered in the past. I call it the rotten mouth ape. I only discovered it recently, although it looks a bit ugly. Its entire body can be converted into energy. And it's relatively easy to mold, and its stability isn't bad. It's a natural building material." Yin Lo. It was also at this moment that the air seemed to ring out with a slight air explosion, similar to the noise of bubbles bursting and air burning. It was very easy for normal people to ignore this kind of sound, but a few ability users with keen senses could determine that this sound originated from the ugly monkey. Oh, it should be the saliva from the rotten mouth ape's mouth, which meant that it came from Cadman's side. A judgment was a judgment, but not many people could clearly determine what Cadman was doing. Until Mr. Mo spoke again. "I'm not angry. Why should I be angry? There are people in the Order who are 10 times, 100 times more excessive than you, and their statuses are even higher than yours." Yin Lo had been a bit absent-minded ever since the rotten mouth ape appeared. She heard Luo Nan speak of a sensitive topic at this time, and she subconsciously wanted to interrupt. Don't listen to his sophistry. It's nothing." Mr. Mo slightly tilted his head. His thin and ordinary face formed a marvelous contrast with the rotten mouth ape's enormous face, which was only separated by a fence. Since the blood flame will was proposed when the Order was founded, it is tantamount to giving up a portion of power and the corresponding design. The only reason why a situation like yours has occurred is because the Blood Soul Temple, the foundation of the Order, lacks a stable and effective identification and withdrawal mechanism. One is the problem of design ideology, and the other is the problem of design ability. Of course, the lack of reflection and supplementation on the material plane is indeed a troublesome matter. Then there's the problem of the level of the current group of people in the Order. Take Cadman for example. He's a blood-sucking bug, yes, but if there's no improvement in the application of ideas, then the vast majority of people in the Order are essentially no different from him. Mr. Mo slightly raised his chin when he spoke to this point. He squinted his eyes and looked behind the cloud of fish scales that filled the sky. He looked at the edge of platinum light that cut down. On this point, some people don't hesitate to use materials, but they do it quite brilliantly. Chapter 869. There were always coincidences in this world. At that moment, Mr. Mo looked up and met the observer in the private airship. Even though he knew it was because of the angle of the broadcast, Yukawa Aishuk, who was sitting on the sofa, held his breath. His eyelids twitched, just like a certain guy by the lake. A thought popped up in his mind. He was talking about the true God and the Pope. Yukawa Aishuk quickly ignored this feeling and thought. He forcefully shifted his gaze to the ugly face of the ugly monkey. Oh, the ugly face of the rotten-mouthed ape. Stimulated by the forceful twist, some pieces of information flew out and were about to form a string. There was only one line left. A few seconds later, Yukawa Aishuk suddenly raised his voice. Takamoto, Takamoto. Takamoto Shigeru quickly appeared in the room. Yukawa Aishuk ordered his intelligence chief. The investigation report from the Aptitude User Union, the one about Gong Chi, pull it out immediately. Shigeru Takamoto, who was proficient in this business, did not say a word. He completed all of this within 2 seconds and projected the contents of the report onto the projection area. Yukawa Aishuk's eyes widened as he searched for the information he needed. But he was soon disappointed. The report was vague and only reported the death of Gong Chi. At the same time, they hoped that branches, powerful organizations, and the church could help investigate the solidification of the abyssal region around May 1st, Chan City time. No, not this. Yukawa Aishuk realized his memory was messed up. He clearly remembered something about it. It's in the internal report of the Jade Society, but it's vague. There's only a simple description of ape-like creatures. Yukawa Aishuk was surprised that it was Bai Xinyan who reminded him. When he checked the relevant content, it was indeed as Bai Xinyan had said. It was only better than nothing. No more detailed information? Transcendents are very proud. They won't describe the death of their own kind so clearly. I suggest you get a good night's sleep. Staying up late will really damage your IQ. As she spoke, Bai Xinyan left the armrest of the sofa. She strode out of the room. Ever since the intercontinental airship incident, Yukawa Aishuk had always been suspicious of Bai Xinyan. But when she really left, he was not used to it. Where are you going? Meeting. Don't disturb me during this time, or I'll be very grateful. Yukawa Aishuk was sure that there was a gap in understanding between him and Bai Xinyan, and this gap seemed to reflect the difference in their information levels. In the era of information and authority, there was nothing more depressing than this kind of gap. What was even more tragic was that people like Bai Xinyan seemed to be many more than he had imagined. Along with the shrill siren, the high-altitude region where the clouds were surging was filled with a blinding red light. The image of the environment that was extremely close to reality began to solidify and then fade away. When the visual virtual scene disappeared, the cramped space of the health pod was completely revealed. The warning light on the top of the pod was still flashing rapidly. Tianbang shook his head. Through the slightly turbid nutrient fluid, he could see the high-priority notifications on the interface of the cabin wall. They glowed red and vibrated continuously, attracting his attention. Due to the limitations of his physical body, Tianbang decided to use telepathic communication. Dr. Pan, the group's experimental base has been overrun by the mutants? Dr. Pan, who was usually calm and collected, suddenly spoke in a hurried tone, which was rare for him. Big news, big trouble, big opportunity. Anyway, hurry up. I'll give you 20 seconds. Please, I'm in the health pod right now. Oh, that's true. Speaking of which, the health pod simulator is more useful than the helmet. Fine, just stay there. I'll open the communication channel to you. You have 10 seconds now, including the time to look at the data. The communication was then cut off. Immediately after, a portion of the health pod broke away from Tianbang's control and entered remote conference mode. It guided Tianbang's senses and projected him into a huge conference hall. The standard of the conference was definitely very high. It was similar to the ring-shaped conference hall where the Star Alliance held a global board meeting. Yes, wait a minute. That's right. Although Tianbang had never spoken here, he had been one of the people in charge of the security forces and had strolled around inside before. He had already seen the Star Alliance's logo that could be seen everywhere in the conference hall. It looked like a printed simplified map of Earth. Some said that it symbolized the coexistence of the common world and the inner world since the era of distortion. Some said that it was a hint of the existence of the deep blue world when the Star Alliance was first established. Perhaps it really was a big scene. However, the conference had probably been held in a hurry. The conference hall, which could accommodate thousands of people, was mostly empty. The figures were all concentrated near the ring-shaped conference table in the center, and some of the empty seats still had figures appearing intermittently. Tianbang felt that he should thank Dr. Pan, who had given him the right to choose his image during the virtual projection. Therefore, what appeared in this conference hall of the highest standard was only a humanoid shadow. Otherwise, he would probably be known throughout the world as the Blood Prison Exhibitionist. Good thing I didn't miss it. Dr. Pan appeared beside him. He was still wearing the white lab coat, but it suited his image very well. Tianbang chuckled. Thank you very much. Dr. Pan waved his hand. Don't worry about those useless things. Watch carefully and digest it well. Although we're just here to listen, we might have a speaking mission. Oh! To be honest, I'm a little nervous. I've never seen so many extraordinaries in my life. They're all top-notch material. Tianbang. Half a second later, his gaze suddenly cut to the ring-shaped conference table in front of him. The ring-shaped area in the middle was already playing an image, in the form of a 30-fold fast-forward. This kind of highly compressed video data would cause a normal person to faint. However, a burner like Tianbang could use the Dynamo Core's analysis function to directly reorganize the information. As for those who chose this kind of unconventional method to receive information, Tianbang's gaze swept past the faces and backs of those people in order to compare them with the built-in database. That yellow-bearded old man is the president of the headquarters, Abner. On the left is Marin, who was beaten up badly by him last time. On the right is the number 1 Ward Master Dale. And there's the Monroe Cannon. Sitting behind Abner is Li Baijiu. Looking at where she's sitting, she's attending the conference as a reporter? Next to her is Ghost Eye. That old pervert still wants to take advantage of her in the virtual world. Her Majesty Empress Wu is also here. Is it really good to favor one and discriminate against the other? Next to Empress Wu is Ouyangqin. He's always serious. Speaking of which, the seating arrangement at the Society's side is a little messy. The seat diagonally across from us is empty, but there's a balance scale. Clearly, the Archbishop of the Order of Justice is also coming. The bald Pope of the Order of Amaterasu has already arrived. Only the most mysterious High Lord of Secret Contract is left. Oh, I can only see the back of his head from where I am. That's right. This was a conference of extraordinaries. It was a dialogue between high-level life forms that had climbed to the top of the world. However, the beginning was nothing out of the ordinary. President Abner coughed and spoke in a gentle and feminine tone. There are still a few who haven't arrived yet, but since we've caught up with the live broadcast, we won't wait any longer. Let's watch while we discuss and exchange our opinions. As he spoke, the video playing at high speed slowed down and entered normal mode. The most eye-catching thing in the video was undoubtedly the huge and ugly face of the demon. Half of its body had caved in, and the other half had rotted away. There was also the lava mouth that was dripping down, as if it could fall to the ground at any time. All these factors fiercely occupied the attention of the audience. However, what attracted Tianbang's attention the most, which was also the focus of the video, was the man sitting in a wheelchair beside him. He looked unfamiliar and a little too thin, as if he was ill. However, at this moment, he was quite relaxed. Perhaps it was because of the sudden change in speed, but the body language of the man in the wheelchair seemed to be slow and unruffled. He was giving a demonstration to the woman behind him who was gently holding the wheelchair. Look, with this half-energy, half-material thing as a foil, Cadman's body and soul structure is a lot more straightforward. Limited by the conditions, we can only look at the general outline. You should be able to find the resonance structure related to the blood-soul temple. Understand the relationship, and then refer to the actual emotional state of a life form, and you'll roughly know where the problem lies. The man in the wheelchair explained while his hands did not stop moving. His fingertips made a few horizontal and vertical cuts in the air, cutting the dripping lava mouth into 20 to 30 parts of different sizes. Not counting the scraps on the periphery, the main part of the cut was clearly a scaled-down human body, including the head, shoulders, chest, abdomen, spine, limbs, and the isolated internal organs. There were also fiery threads in between. They were like the connecting lines of a doll, but they were also like the blood vessels and nerves of a real human body. It was precisely this dismembered lava mold. The head at the top had already been cut off. It was the size of a date, but it had complete facial features. At this moment, it was completely distorted by fear and pain. Unfortunately, not many people could clearly hear what it was shouting. Inside the virtual venue, most people had dull expressions, but there were also some who were overflowing with interest. This person is certainly an outstanding surgeon. He's also very good at teaching and educating people. Sitting on the right side of President Abner was the world's top boundary grandmaster, Constance Dale. She was still dressed as a medieval witch. Her hood covered her face, and the corners of her lips were half hidden. She carried out her favorite mysticism. Because of this person, I think of another person. He also loves to preach. The legendary Professor Luo. Didn't he come to the conference today? Oh, you're talking about Luo Nan? President Abner stroked the yellow beard on his cheek. His tone was still gentle. This time, it's an analysis and discussion on the death of Deputy Secretary General Gong Chi. It's an invitation system. Luo Nan isn't a relevant person, but according to the theory and level of strength he's displayed recently, he's certainly qualified. As he spoke, Abner cast his gaze towards Ouyang Chen, who was a bit far away. Although it was a virtual world, his gaze was still solid. Oh, Ouyang, why don't your branch contact him? If it's convenient, invite him over. Everyone can exchange what they need. Chapter 870. Ouyang Chen did not sit at the very front of the ring-shaped conference table. Instead, he sat in the second row with Her Majesty Empress Wu. He sat upright, watching the live broadcast very seriously. His right hand tapped soundlessly on the virtual desktop. The changes in length were quite rhythmic, giving people the feeling that he was taking notes or something. His appearance was in stark contrast to Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was sitting leisurely next to him. Her Majesty Empress Wu was fiddling with the virtual scroll in her hand. Ouyang Chen did not respond immediately when President Abner called out to him. 2 seconds passed before his fingertips stopped tapping. He turned his face away from the central projection. It was unknown whether or not it was a virtual effect, but the frameless lenses clipped to the bridge of his nose seemed to be plated with a layer of light. The lenses covered most of his pupils, and his expression was stern and serious. He still did not open his mouth. It seemed that he was choosing his words carefully. Then, earlier you wanted to join in on the fun and get a share of his grandfather's property. Now you're asking for an exchange. Are you preparing to take the opportunity to call each other brothers and get greedy? A moment of silence appeared in the ring-shaped conference room. Then there were coughs, muffled laughter, and of course, loud laughter. At the level of participants, the vast majority of people already had the tendency to do as they pleased. Not everyone would take President Abner's face into consideration. Of course, everyone's gazes were cast in Ouyang Chen's direction. However, everyone could see very clearly that Ouyang Chen did not open his mouth. The voice came from beside him, behind Her Majesty Empress Wu. The audience was already there. Wow! Tianbang let out a small gasp of surprise. He could clearly see that the person who had spoken against Abner just now was clearly a young girl. She wore a brimmed hat and a black jacket. She looked like she could just go out and do a street dance and play around. She really was a young girl. Tianbang recognized her. She was Zhang Yingying of the Xia City branch. She was a diehard follower of Her Majesty Empress Wu. She was also someone in Luonan's circle of friends. Speaking of which, this young girl didn't even seem to be an architect. Why did she come to listen? It was fine for her to come with Her Majesty Empress Wu for a meeting, but her words were really out of line. Tianbang grinned. Don't be fooled by Abner's soft voice. He wasn't able to become the president of the Ability User Society by relying on his ability to eavesdrop. Zhang Yingying also seemed to know that she was in trouble. She pulled down the brim of her hat, shrank her neck, and tried to hide her body behind Her Majesty Empress Wu. No matter what, she would not make eye contact with President Abner. The smile on President Abner's face didn't change at all. He didn't berate the youngster for being rude. He even stopped the furious Marlin and looked at Her Majesty Empress Wu. The expression on the latter's face was indifferent. He didn't react much to the gazes from President Abner and the other directions. Using the virtual book in her hand, she gently combed the hair by her cheek and said softly, "Don't doubt it. It's my idea. Martial monarch. I've just become a transcendent, so I have to make things difficult for him." Those words were reasonable, but they were slightly vulgar. I was afraid that it would damage my bearing, so I let my children speak. Please don't blame me. The atmosphere in the conference room was obviously breaking down. Not just the others, even Ghost Eye, who was standing behind President Abner and chatting with Li Baijiu, was laughing very loudly. In the end, Abner had a deep understanding of the Great Wall Mansion. Even at this time, he was still managing his expression perfectly. The smile lines on his face even deepened a bit, so much so that the yellow beard on the side of his cheeks shook slightly. I understand now. It's because I'm standing up for Toyama's high seas auction. Commercial activities are special in nature. Moreover, times have changed. Everyone holds this meeting for the sake of negotiation and exchange. It's just that some youngsters in the past lacked experience and lacked communication channels. They didn't really know how to negotiate on stage. They felt wronged when they were bullied in a fight, so it was understandable that the adults would stand up for them. And now that the youngsters are independent, everyone is happy to see this happen. What's the standard for children to fight? Ouyang Chen's index finger scraped across the bridge of his nose. He slightly adjusted the position of his glasses and spoke very seriously. I've made a post-mortem deduction of the intercontinental airship incident. When Luo Nan began communicating with the youngsters of the Yuchuan family, the interference power of the abyssal region was far below the observable standard. The level and intensity were considered very low. No matter what, it wasn't out of line. Why did an adult suddenly jump out? You're talking about us, right? The Pope of Baiji let out a low laugh. His thin, hairless face had a calm appearance. It doesn't matter if it's me or Qianju. We won't overstep our boundaries and stand up for the children of other families. As for the intercontinental airship incident, it should be understood like this. Pulling people to the table, whether it's drinking tea or arm wrestling, always requires a bit of effort. Fine, this is your president's logic. The truth is that we've always bullied the weak and feared the strong. It's just that ordinary people aren't as strong as us. The corner of Tianbang's lips twitched. It was probably only in this sort of situation that these old extraordinaries would speak so bluntly. However, this battle of tongues, which was about to expand, was, to put it bluntly, each family expressing their position. There was no substantial pressure. President Abner's smiling face was the clearest benchmark. Of course, the earliest pressure was washed away by Zhang Yingying's fearless speech. Or perhaps the time wasn't right yet. Her Majesty Empress Wu reluctantly concluded, compared to the Amaterasu order, President Abner really does care and cherish. Especially his speech. It's incisive, deep, and shallow. It's very targeted and instructive. Oh my, where did your extraordinary bearing go? Tianbang finally laughed out loud. He wasn't the only one who laughed. He wasn't even in the minority. Her Majesty Empress Wu became more and more open-minded amidst her laughter. The only pity is that he beat around the bush a bit. I'm afraid that only you, President, can speak so clearly. How about this? This is the communication method over there. Everyone, no need to be polite. You can discuss and research or call each other brothers. Just go ahead. I also really want to know what kind of brilliant argument he can make today. As she spoke, Her Majesty Empress Wu tossed out a white bead of light. It spun around in the live broadcast area. It was none other than the special effects of Luo Nan's message link. Tianbang casually scanned it and confirmed that there were no mistakes. There were quite a few people who did the same thing as him. Luo Nan would probably receive quite a few friend requests after today's meeting. President Abner maintained his smile. He turned his head and instructed Marlin, "Send an invitation to Professor Luo right now. If he's free, invite him to participate in this discussion. Everyone is looking forward to the splendid explanation that configuration theory will give to this world." Then he changed the topic of conversation. Before the situation changes, everyone should first understand the background information of today's meeting. See why this meeting is being held, and choose this person. Mr. Mo was quite cooperative in the live broadcast. His lecture was neither fast nor slow. It looked like it would continue for quite some time. On the other hand, Vice President Marlin had just made arrangements to contact Luo Nan. He also had to introduce specific information. He was quite busy for a time. The main topic of this meeting is to ask everyone to identify the true murderer of Deputy Secretary General Gong Qi's murder case. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 1st of May in Chan City, Deputy Secret Chief Gong was assassinated in his seclusion location. Unfortunately, he perished. The specific circumstances have already been reported. I won't go into detail this time. Headquarters has invited experts to earnestly analyze the scene. Aside from basic judgments such as the time of the crime, motive, and so on, they have also broken down the clues from the act of murder. In the end, a total of 7 conditions were formed. These will serve as the criteria for identifying suspect. The information in the hands of the participants was updated along with Marlin's explanation. First, an electromagnetic ability user. Connie, Monroe, and I fought with the murderer that day, or should I say one of the murderers. We are certain that he definitely belongs to this type. Second, an extraordinary or a manipulator of the Abyss region's solidified configuration. This should be the case. I won't go into detail. Third, the extreme utilization of the Abyss region's power and micromanipulation ability. This gives people a deep impression. Fourth, the ability to burn and absorb flesh and blood. Gong Qi's skeleton was destroyed by this. Not even his bones remain. Fifth, the ability to assemble and manufacture machinery. The murderer is equipped with an exoskeleton for combat. The style should have been specially issued, but there are too many possibilities. Better than nothing. Sixth, the ability to conceal and teleport. Without this ability, the murderer wouldn't have been able to easily escape from our pincer attack. Seventh, the ape-like creature. It was the first unexpected factor to appear on Volcano Island. To a large extent, it interferes with our line of sight. Moreover, it is highly related to that plane. Everyone understands. Some people laughed, but most people were very serious. The death of any extraordinary was a very serious matter. If a plane was involved, it would be even more serious. Marin continued to emphasize, considering that this matter is most likely not the work of a single person. As long as a single person fulfills 4 of these 7 conditions, they will be a major suspect. Of course, this also has to be in line with basic criminal reasoning. President Abner added softly from the back, "If we can directly prove that someone or some people are highly related to that plane, we can basically directly conclude the case. Everyone should understand that this is the core condition and the most direct evidence." Tian Bang curled his lips. Dogsh *T logic. However, the venue was rather lively and noisy. At least half of the people were shouting. Exactly. The way they heckled didn't have any extraordinary bearing at all. Heh, the human heart is like Dogsh *T. After a long introduction, Marin took advantage of the situation and drew everyone's attention to the live broadcast. "I've never heard of this Mr. Mo before. However, the Blood Flame Order he's in has previously fulfilled 2 of the 7 conditions: the ability to absorb flesh and blood, and the solidification of the abyssal region. Especially the latter. It has been confirmed that on May 1st, Chan City time, the Blood Flame Order had an unplanned sacrificial event that also lasted for a long time. This bit of evidence is quite solid. Let me add, the most important witness is that person. Oh, Cadman, the unlucky guy whose life and death could no longer be confirmed. Thank you, Apocalypse Laboratory, for providing us with an observation point of view, allowing us to simultaneously witness the birth of this Mr. Mo. At the same time, we also added 2 more conditions. There is one that we can't see, but the evidence is conclusive. This Mr. Mo is quite accomplished in the field of exoskeleton design, and he is very willing to invest. He is currently discussing the purchase of a processing plant in Ban City. As for what we can see, it's a mutant called the mushed-mouth ape. There are no records of it in the world's searched information. The only thing that can be seen is that plane shrouded in clouds and mist. Chapter 871. Marin spoke quickly, but there were still some who couldn't control their impatience. Not far behind Marin, a loud and clear voice rang out. 4 out of 7, the most important one is more or less confirmed. What are we still talking about here? Let's just do it. General Corney, the association's intention is not to make a rash judgment. Considering the Blood Flame Order's past strength and performance, isn't there still that Mr. Mo? Marin took the opportunity to explain. Due to the lack of time, from the channels we currently have, this Mr. Mo has no official information at all. Everything we can find is suspected to be fake. Then what's the point of talking? It's definitely an impersonation. And looking at that bear's heart and leopard's guts, he can't be weak. If this guy wasn't an extraordinary, wouldn't some people who bully the weak and fear the strong have already swallowed him into their stomachs? When the attendees heard General Corney's tone, they thought they would hear some sort of live stream eating *T or something along those lines. In the end, this guy turned cowardly so quickly. Evidently, his impatient tone just now was a sign of him trying to instigate others. For a moment, cold laughter rang out. Although this General Corney had the title of general, he did not actually belong to the military. Instead, he was the leader of a private armed force active in the Central and North Africa region. Although this guy was an extraordinary, he was famous for being shameless. Today, he could be the guardian of a city, and tomorrow, he could be the leader of a vagrant raiding squad. His big mouth could be said to have been somewhat restrained in recent years, but he would still reveal his true nature from time to time. But there were still many people who were willing to cooperate. Not far away from Tianbang, someone played the role of a sidekick. It's not strange to impersonate someone, but there are dozens of extraordinary in the world, and they're all familiar with each other. So who could it be? Tianbang tilted his head to take a look. He recognized Saucedo of Moose City in northern Europe. He was a feminine man who was the complete opposite of the common impression of Vikings. He had been active in the fashion industry for a period of time, and had a knack for praising and ruining people. It was said that he did not get along with Her Majesty Empress Wu. Now, a soft knife could be used to stab someone, and it could also be fatal. Compared to Saucedo, General Corney was already a straightforward person. He stretched out his pitch-black palm and rubbed his fingers in the air a few times. That candidate, all of you must have molded it in your hearts. Halfway through his words, he saw Ouyang Chen's gaze directed at him. Behind the glasses, his gaze was calm and clear, like a colorless lake, but it could also be said to be like a polished blade. General Kenny was terrified once again. He chuckled and did not say anything else. Everyone wants to snatch food, but no one is willing to stand out. Compared to ordinary people, the mental world of extraordinaries doesn't seem to have any significant difference. After transcendence, there's no such thing as sainthood. Dr. Pan and Tian Bang conversed through a private channel. They spoke much more casually under these circumstances. They're going around and around here because they suspect Luonan, right? What do you think? Honestly, I can't tell. Tian Bang knew that the extraordinaries around the ring-shaped meeting platform had invited him over to listen to the meeting only because of his special relationship with the Blood Flame Order. They wanted to obtain more insider information and make a more accurate judgment. This gave Tian Bang a strange sense of self-awareness that he was a traitor. But even if it was out of personal interest, after he digested the information he had prepared for the meeting, he still spent a lot of effort to observe Mr. Mo. Tian Bang had some harvests. He didn't obtain them from Mr. Mo himself. Instead, he obtained them from Mr. Mo's subordinate, Cadman, whose life and death were hard to determine. Tian Bang knew of Cadman. He knew that Cadman was a fleshly adept with decent strength. He also knew of the technique of the violent fire seal. This made him naturally put himself in Cadman's shoes. How could his soul be captured from thousands of kilometers away? Was the violent fire seal the key trigger in the entire process? Was it possible to avoid this result? What role did the Blood Soul Temple, the solidified configuration in the Abyss region, play? What role did it play? Tian Bang analyzed as he put himself in Mr. Mo's shoes. Even though Tian Bang had mostly broken away from the system of the Blood Flame Order and the Restraint faction, he still had some insight. But these were far from enough to be used as a basis for a qualitative judgment. Tian Bang said, Mr. Mo's situation is a clear suspicion, but it hasn't reached the stage of true evidence. If Mr. Mo wasn't an extraordinary, he might have died 100 times over by now. But he is. At the very least, it's highly likely that he is. If that's the case, then the nature is completely different. Dr. Pan, with the rigorous attitude of a researcher, gave a reasonable discussion. Up until now, this Mr. Mo hasn't shown any solid evidence that he's an extraordinary. On the contrary, he's been too vague, Tian Bang laughed. To play with a person's soul in the palm of his hand from thousands of kilometers away. What kind of level is this? That's because he's dealing with his own order's believers. 2 of the leaders of the 3 great orders have come. Perhaps you can ask them how they deal with undevout believers? Is it possible to do things so beautifully from thousands of kilometers away? We've also done a few models of the Blood Soul Temple. If we consider the optimal solution, Tian Bang shook his head. Don't mention those kinds of wild guesses. Besides, doesn't optimal mean most dangerous? Everyone has to leave a way out for themselves. When it comes to extraordinaries, it's never too much to be cautious. It's been a bit better these past few years. There aren't many cases of extraordinaries fighting to the death, but every time it happens, it shakes the entire world. There's no need to talk about Gong Qi. A few years ago, Jin Buhuan was completely influenced by a nuclear bomb. Dr. Pan, didn't you research there for a period of time? Dr. Pan slowly nodded. Yes. It was in that volcanic area. In comparison, Jin Tong died the most sullen death. He was finished without a sound. He only left behind a mountain of bones for the people of the world. Suddenly, a new train of thought opened up in Tianbang's mind. Perhaps, it seemed, it was possible. He found a new piece of evidence. Mountain of Bones, Blood Soul Temple, and the headband that fell into Luo Nan's hands in the end, an electromagnetic ability user. Jin Tong was an electromagnetic ability user. Although this brother belonged to the fleshly side, it was insignificant when compared to the clues themselves. Tianbang had heard in Xia City that Luo Nan was researching and developing equipment for the Jin Tong headband. There was a period of time in the past when Luo Nan used the Jin Tong headband to control some sort of advanced civilization's inheritance. None of this was a big deal when considered alone. But when the fragments were put together, 7 to 5, they could even echo each other. What's wrong? It's nothing. Tianbang wasn't going to be the stupid bird that stuck its head out. He just needed to think a little more to understand that the matter of Luo Nan possessing the Jin Tong headband was no secret. The problem lay in the fact that the cause of Jin Tong's death was still a mystery that had yet to be completely solved. Jin Tong had an inextricably close relationship with the Xia City branch. No one knew how deep the Xia City branch's involvement went. Her Majesty Empress Wu had sent Jin Tong flying. What happened next? To what extent could Ouyang Chen's protective behavior reach? How many supporters did the Xia City branch have in regards to this matter? Sympathizers? Dealing with an extraordinary was on a completely different level from dealing with 2, 3, or even more extraordinary. One had to be prepared for a local war or even a world war. Tianbang felt his finger move away from the nuclear button. In order to strengthen his will, he emphasized once more, the possibility of Professor Luo and Mr. Mo being the same person is extremely small. At the very least again. Dr. Pan hated this sort of vague wording. Tianbang pursed his lips. Anyone who comes from the Blood Flame Order and has received the Order's knowledge system, such as myself, would find it hard to accept that a person who had absolutely no contact with the Blood Flame Order half a year ago can now perform an anatomical analysis of the Blood Soul Temple and the believers under the Blood Soul Temple system. These points of knowledge are very difficult, okay? Dr. Pan sighed. Fine. Even if they aren't the same person, it doesn't seem to be a problem if they have a cooperative relationship. Perhaps. Tianbang was saddened by his own brain. He couldn't help but ponder along Dr. Pan's train of thought. When did the two begin to cooperate? At the very latest, it wouldn't be later than Jin Tong's death. That was in early December of last year. Mrs. Halder and the others fled Xia City in early November. If they had already reached a cooperative agreement back then, the one who died that day might have been Tianbang himself. The problem was that the two sides were quite unhappy because of the matter of the Soul Order at the end of last year. But looking at today's information, this Mr. Mo was clearly standing up for the remnants of the Soul Order. The clues were fighting with each other. Besides, this line of thought was still unable to explain Mr. Mo's origins. Looking at his attainments in the foundational techniques of the Blood Flame Order, he was simply an ancestor who had been hidden from the world for many years. But ever since the Order was founded, Tianbang had a precise grasp on the birth, aging, sickness, and death of all the powerful figures of the Order. He was certain that the Blood Flame Order hadn't had such a hidden ancestor-level figure in the 40 to 50 years since it was founded. Actually, he was a visitor from beyond the heavens. The corner of Tianbang's lips twitched. This was too fucking roundabout. No wonder President Abner and the others were hesitant. Mr. Mo's entire being was hidden in a dense fog of fragmented logic. At this time, Marlin also expressed a similar point of view. Due to the limitations of the Apocalypse Laboratory's observation methods, we have no way of obtaining more information. Our analysis of this Mr. Mo also stops at the surface. We can't see clearly or see through him. Speaking up to this point, Marlin suddenly changed the topic and launched a sudden attack. The Pope of the 100 Collections is the host in this aspect, and he has set up a grand scheme to illuminate Osaka City. Presumably, he has an even more exquisite view? The Pope of the 100 Collections didn't have the slightest reaction of being attacked. He spoke in a logical manner, neither hurried nor slow. It was as if he had long since prepared for this. I can't say that he is exquisite. It's just that he has seen things a bit longer than others. In my opinion, this Mr. Mo's exquisite control over the power of the Abyss region is something that none of us here can compare to. Chapter 872. Fine control? Isn't it better to just say 7 out of 5? Someone in the venue immediately deciphered the Pope of Baiji's verbal technique. In fact, it was 7 out of 5 if it was really a gang. Tian Bang was still evaluating in his heart, but more people wanted to see proof. Amidst the chaotic cries for explanation, General Kenny became lively again, and his voice was especially loud. If you want to win everyone's trust, you have to at least give a reason. The Pope of Baiji smiled. As I said, this is the result of observation. Because you haven't been able to observe? This time, it was Constance Dollar's turn to speak. This female extraordinaire was a practitioner of mysticism, and she was used to speaking with the prophetic tone of witches and witches. Of course, her eyes were indeed sharp, and because of her outstanding attainments in boundaries, she had a unique view of the current scene in the live broadcast, including the situation in Band City. If the blood surges again, your eyes will be ruined. The Pope of Baiji ignored the deliberate ambiguity in Ms. Dollar's words and continued to smile. This is also a part of observation. While the verbal and scheming battle in the virtual ring venue was gradually accumulating, on the passenger terminal of Band City's Ping Trade Market, which everyone was paying attention to, Goto Yoshimasa was in a state of high anxiety. This emotion, as time went by, and as Mr. M.O. spat out words that he seemed to understand but not understand, became heavier and heavier. Especially in Band City today, the boundless light behind the fish-scale clouds that filled the sky should have been his greatest reliance. But at this moment, as the midday sun shone down, he only felt as if there was a blade on his back. The heat continuously seeped into his body and accumulated, but he couldn't find a channel to vent it. In fact, there was, and the channel was the eyeballs embedded in his eye sockets. The heat radiated from the sky was originally used by this pair of special eyeballs, in order to break through Mr. Mo's external appearance and directly to his deep essence. Goto Masayoshi once felt that he could do it. He had the support of the Fusang Divine Tree system. He also saw that Mr. M.O. was using methods that exceeded the limits of people's imagination. In theory, this person must also use power that exceeded the limits of people's imagination. Under such circumstances, the black box created by the cloak could not be maintained in a perfect and flawless state. This was also the time for this pair of eyeballs to realize its significance. However, until now, the cloak was still a cloak, and the black box was still a black box. He still couldn't break it. Goto Masayoshi could only think like this. With Mr. Mo's ability, most likely dealing with Cadman and his kind would be as easy as flipping his hand, like the clouds and the breeze clear, and would not reveal the least bit of a clue. So, more than once, he hoped that Captain Jimmy would be able to use his hands to create the conditions for him, the eyes, to observe. However, after that detestable bastard suffered a loss, he hid in the tin can and pretended to be deaf and mute. When he was forced into a corner, he even boasted back, "I have a more important mission." This coward. Of course, Goto Masayoshi knew that Captain Jimmy had a backer. However, who didn't have a backer? The problem was that Goto Masayoshi's own backer did not have any new arrangement. Actually, Goto Masayoshi had never accepted any arrangement. He and his heavenly state warriors were just relying on the wild growth of the Fusang Divine Tree. He could use the name of the Amaterasu sect to his heart's content, like a fox borrowing the might of a tiger, to obtain benefits for himself, to strengthen his forces, and to become a socialite in a certain sense. However, his heart was also clear. Behind everything, there was a most essential mission: to be a good eye. However, he did not manage to do it now. This made Goto Masayoshi's mood very bad. The discomfort on his body was much more direct than the change in his state of mind. The eyeball was still continuously gathering sunlight energy, trying to penetrate the cloak on Mr. Mo's body, but it could not find a breakthrough point. The energy was being consumed, but most of the energy was still unable to enter or exit, only operating around the eyeball and its surroundings. Goto Masayoshi felt that his head was swelling, especially around his eye sockets. That pair of special eyeballs seemed to be squeezing out bit by bit. At first, the feeling was not too clear, but when it became clear, it was already too much, and even if he wanted to control it, he did not know where to start. At this moment, Goto Masayoshi felt that he was like an overinflated tire. His whole body was burning hot, and not only was his head dizzy, his whole body was practically about to explode. He wouldn't really explode, right? Goto Masayoshi had never encountered such a situation before, so he was unable to make an effective judgment. And once this thought was born, he could not stop it no matter what. Even though he knew that he should not, in the depths of Goto Masayoshi's heart, fear still seeped into his anxious emotions. Of course, what triggered them was both behind and in front of him. It was also at this moment, in Goto Masayoshi's vision, there seemed to be dirty smoke lingering, undulating inside and outside the invisible cloak around Mr. Mo's body. Those miscellaneous people, who had already been dominated by terror, contributed another wave of, "It's me?" Goto Masayoshi suddenly realized. His heart suddenly sank, but the special eyeball still faithfully and objectively reflected all the changes that had happened. It allowed Goto Masayoshi to see clearly what kind of interaction had formed between the negative emotions that were born in his body and Mr. Mo's previous interactions. Wait a chance. Goto Masayoshi's thoughts once again lagged behind the reaction of the eyeball. The sunlight that filled the sky, under the support of the Fusang Divine Tree's Great Divine Treasure System, formed an extraordinary connection with Goto Masayoshi's special eyeball above the normal laws of physics. After that, Goto Masayoshi felt that his body seemed to have entered a kind of transparent state, creating the best conditions for the sunlight that was projected over. Most importantly, Goto Masayoshi's thoughts had actually participated. As a kind of targeting tool, it had specified the direction and target of focus, and had received the feedback information. At this moment, Goto Masayoshi followed the smoke and saw even more. He saw the trajectory of the smoke circulation, including some of the details of the operation and transformation, and thus naturally discovered that the cloak and black box belonged to a kind of tight and exquisite energy structure, yet still maintained a highly integrated state with the real world. Because of the integration, they were one. It's this. Goto Masayoshi never would have thought that the difficult problem that had been dragging on for a long time would actually have a breakthrough because of his own fear. He also didn't have the time to think deeply about the problem inside, only doing his best to memorize and analyze, trying to dig out even more things. He had already seen the light. Everything was difficult at the beginning. Very quickly, his vision suddenly slanted, completely leaving its original focus. His entire vision was also affected, swaying back and forth. Swaying? The so-called swaying was actually swaying back and forth. It felt like the eyeball wasn't embedded in the eye sockets, but rather attached to some thin string. His randomly swaying vision, in the blink of an eye, he rearranged the situation around him. Mr. M.O., Mushed-Mouth Ape, the cowardly Jimmy, his terrified subordinates, and the veterans that he had forcefully dragged over to confront and so on. Why are all these guys looking at me? And with that kind of gaze? What is this? In his swaying vision, a thicket of blood, flesh, nerves, and bones appeared. It was malevolent and ugly, and emitted an ominous aura of death. It was still burning. Chapter 873. Goto Masayoshi could see that at the top of the burning bush, there was two fruits. On it, there were intermittent embossed lines surrounding it, some thick, some thin, some green, some red. That was blood vessels. His consciousness trembled violently. His thoughts and the veins in his blood vessels merged together, and he suddenly understood what the fruit on the bushes was. That was his eyeballs, his, at least in name. They belonged to him. The two eyeballs reflected each other, combining with the flesh, bones, and nerve functions at the back, piecing together a complete field of vision, and also reflecting the truth. That was the bloody truth that Goto Masayoshi would never be able to experience under the framework of being a human. At this moment, all of Goto Masayoshi's mind was smeared with strange and dazzling colors. There was no logical relationship between each color, and that was the color of collapse. Even so, Goto Masayoshi was still attracted by this pair of eyeballs, and he could clearly see that the smoke of his negative emotions was wrapped by the essence of his flesh and blood. A part of it was left in the burning bush, which was also the rule system of the great Fusang divine tree. It was the accumulated heat of the sunlight that couldn't be used, and it was the final, meaningless venting. As for the other part, it was together with the people on the passenger terminal who were already seized by fear, together with the same color of emotional smoke. Under the drive of an invisible force field, it was thrown into the depths of the cloak around Mr. Mo, and it was thrown into an incomprehensible level. Although it was incomprehensible, he finally saw it. The pitiful quality that belonged to him was twisted, torn, and completely evaporated in the cracks of the opposing rules. The last of his rationality ended here. Goto Masayoshi had no meaning left, and what was left was only the burning flesh, bones, and nerve. And these very quickly lost the outline of the human organs in the flames. Only that pair of eyeballs, that were still filled with blood, were shaking in the flames, emitting a demonic light. And it was also at this moment that the passenger terminal finally rang with a scream. The heavenly citizens that surrounded the area were certainly a collection of violent people from Band City, and there was no lack of ability users among them. But when this scene unfolded in front of their eyes, it still broke the nerves of quite a number of people. They had been soaked in fear for too long, and they just lacked a trigger that would allow them to collapse. Plop, plop. In the chaos, some people were directly pushed into the lake, subconsciously struggling, and even dragged their companions down with them. 2 to 3 people fell into the water, creating a huge splash, and also caused a slight wave on the shore. The undulating waves naturally spread along the embankment. Some of them even slapped a thick thigh covered in scales and fine hair on the side. A part of the deep purple mouth, and a part of it, and a part of it, a part of the thin smoke flowed in and out, as if there was a high temperature and poison intertwined. A part of it, a part. Thin wisps of smoke flowed in and out of the deep purple slit. It was as if high temperature and poison were intertwining with each other as the lava saliva spurted out. Ah! It was unknown who took the lead, but a group of violent people scattered in all directions. At the same time, more people were knocked into the lake, and as they struggled and screamed in the water, what little order there was fell apart. It's a little ugly. In the virtual ring venue, the Pope of the 100 Collections sighed, looking a little disappointed. No, it's very pretty. Constance Dollar continued the conversation with the Pope of the 100 Collections. This was not a deliberate bickering. At this time, among the various audiences who were watching this live broadcast, a considerable part of them were in favor of Ms. Dollar. What they were watching, of course, was not the chaotic and vexed heavenly citizens on the distant dock, but the entanglement and collision of Mr. Mo's cloak and the forest of burning flesh and bones in the process. Both were creations of special rules. They clashed with each other and penetrated each other, but neither of them was completely successful. This was a confrontation at the transcendent level, but because it was a live broadcast, the corresponding turbulence in the abyss could not be seen. However, it was precisely this half-concealed, half-restrained wrestling that made it all the more obvious. Every audience member, or at least every extraordinaire, had their own guesses. The vast majority of them kept their thoughts to themselves, but there would always be people who would express a very special kind of expression. This Mr. Mo seems to be a gentle person. As a world-famous fashionista, Xiao Saito's voice was quite gentle, but the meaning was even more subtle. "Don't you prefer the tough type?" someone asked. Xiao Saito did not mind and continued, "Don't you think so? Up until now, the Pope of the 100 Collections has exhausted nearly 40 rounds of rule changes, burning up the last bit of material carrier, but still unable to find out Mr. Mo's background. Is that so?" The Pope of the 100 Collections laughed very sincerely. In Ban City, under the cover of the Fusang Divine Tree System, Mr. Mo can still control it to this extent. It's amazing. Fine control is only the most basic description. The concealment and concealment ability formed from this is the most amazing. 5 out of 7, 6 out of 7. After a few seconds of silence, Vice President Marin coughed. "Gentle, what is the definition of gentle?" Smiling, Xiao Saito stretched out his hand and drew an outline in front of him that was quite similar to Mr. Mo's. With Mr. Mo's ability to conceal his presence and restrain his psychic waves, as long as he doesn't want to show himself, the Pope of the 100 Collections wouldn't be able to catch his shadow even if he had 10 pairs of eyes. But he still showed himself. Why? At least from what I've seen and understood so far, he's standing up for his subordinates and partners who are in trouble. He's providing them with protection and support, and he's not hesitating to put himself in danger. This way of doing things, isn't this a gentle heart? Xiao Saito's embellishment sounded very praiseworthy and high praise, but anyone who knew him well would feel a cold, slippery snake wriggling in their ears and chest. This is, how does the Pope of the 100 Collections do things? Even Dr. Pan could figure out the meaning behind it. Faint boos and laughter could be heard in the hall. Xiao Saito accepted it calmly. He didn't want to hide it anyway. He was 6 or 7,000 kilometers away from Ban City. No matter what, he wouldn't be able to get the first prize. In that case, it would be more interesting to make the situation more chaotic. But the problem was, would Mr. Mo, who seemed to have popped out of a rock, really do what Xiao Saito analyzed? Would the Pope of the 100 Collections and the Amaterasu Order under his rule believe in this judgment? Interesting angle. The Pope of the 100 Collections' tone didn't have any interesting reaction at all. The smile on his face had faded, and under his bald head, his entire face was indifferent. You might as well think of a few more good ideas like this. Just one: I can't entrust the foundation of Ban City to this so-called gentle heart. It was obvious from his words that the Amaterasu Order, or at least the Pope of the 100 Collections, wasn't too willing to go against this Mr. Mo in Ban City. As for true God Qianju, well, he might already be rubbing his palms together. At least for now, the Pope of the 100 Collections was still steering the ship, very quietly and honestly asking for opinions. Are there any other possibilities? Why would such a person appear in front of people at this time, at this moment, in this way? This is a question that I can't answer no matter how much I think about it. Why don't you all give me some suggestions? That's right, why? Intentional, unintentional, active, forced. These high-end ability users with rich experience could easily think of dozens or even hundreds of possibilities, but every possibility had to be supported by sufficiently solid logic. Then again, at their level, logic wasn't a necessary consideration. For example, the cause of this meeting. Gong Qi had already been dead for half a month. The Ability User Association had been searching for him all over the world, but there had been no progress at all. Suddenly, such a person had jumped out and openly displayed his deep suspicions. Moreover, it was in the territory of two top-notch extraordinaries. What logic was there to speak of in this? What do you think is going on? Dr. Pan tried to discuss with Tian Bang again. But this time, Tian Bang didn't join the conversation. Coincidentally, an order had entered his mind through the channel of the health pod. Major General Tian, the meeting hopes to understand the information related to the blood flame order in the Jean Tong incident. Please be prepared to speak. 6 out of 7 was not enough. Was this a 7 out of 7? In the end, there were still people who couldn't stay idle within the restraint faction. The first thing Tian Bang reflected upon was his own self-control. Then he considered on an even broader level. Mr. Mo's sudden appearance meant that there was nothing else he could do aside from the Blood Flame Order as a clue. The Blood Flame Order was a secret order. Actually, it had been a rather well-known organization in the inner world for several decades. Everyone knew the ins and outs of the order. There wasn't much meaning in digging further. But if he could solidify the relationship between Luo Nan and the Blood Flame Order, then the monotonous clues would immediately be plentiful and three-dimensional. Back then, the Hill of Bones in the seas outside of Xia City had long since spread into the eyes of millions and millions of ability users in the inner world along with the broadcast signal. Was there a lack of 2 or 3 people among them? Which big shot of the military wanted to decisively take a side? Or perhaps this was a higher level of sitting on top of the mountain to watch the tigers fight. It was fine to show one's stance, but did they ask for the opinions of others? Tian Bang reflected upon himself for the second time. Was it because he had been acting far too easy to bully in the outside world? So much so that any random Tom, Dick, or Harry dared to use him as a gun. Dr. Pan. Have you checked the communication privileges of the experimental center recently? This, I'm not too sure. What's wrong? There's a spam message coming in. You guys are quite open-minded. Tian Bang used his own privileges to form an overlay as he spoke. He adjusted it to the highest level of non-combat readiness. It wasn't to the extent of cutting off internal and external communications, but at the very least, there needed to be some sort of identity verification. Of course, he was currently in the midst of a human experiment. The verification work was handed over to his young but reliable aide, Lieutenant Colonel Zhu Ling, to handle. As for the spam message in front of him, what was the point of mentioning it? Having done all this, Tian Bang magnanimously became a spectator. Oh, there was also that speech. Things like bioelectricity disorder and memory errors were far too common during the human experiment phase. There was really nothing that could be done. The corner of Tian Bang's mouth twitched when Mr. Mo's thin and sickly face revealed a clear smile over at Osaka City. He extended his hand like he was plucking a fruit. He pinched one of the eyeballs within the flames of the thicket that was about to be completely burned away. I can study it for a bit. Wow. There was no telling how many people in the circular hall exclaimed at this moment. Most of them couldn't tell how many marvelous and subtle operations Mr. Mo's seemingly simple action had to be performed on the transcendent level. In any case, Mr. Mo had indeed plucked a fruit and pinched it with 3 fingers. But that wasn't the end. He raised his head again. This time, it was an overly direct angle that pierced through the projection of the live stream into the virtual circular hall. I want this one too. Chapter 874. What does he want? Has he discovered us? The higher the concealment ability of Mr. Mo's cloak, the more penetrative the light from his eyes, which were the windows of his soul. They were separated by thousands or even tens of thousands of kilometers, and the boundary between the virtual and the real lay between them. However, at this moment, a similar thought flashed through the minds of most of the audience in the virtual venue. It had nothing to do with logic. It was just their first feeling. However, the feeling didn't last long. While their thoughts were in turmoil, Mr. Mo's eyes remained fixed, and his body didn't move. The gigantic bloody fiend behind him had already made the clearest move. At this moment, the mushed-mouthed ape moved from stillness to a great extent and at a great speed. It was to the extent that its enormous body was like a liquid, or like a wave of light that had broken through the barrier of a solid wall. The filthy color of blood mostly covered the glitter of the light wave, but the elements contained inside were even more complicated. It seemed that a violent chemical reaction was taking place inside the bloody light and between it and the materials in the outside world. The camera shot from Captain Jimmy's perspective was instantly polluted by the bloody light. The irregular halos and spots obscured most of the details there. F***ck. In the virtual venue, several people blurted out their catchphrases. The problem was that the terrible effect of the live stream did not improve because of their curses. On the contrary, the bloodstains, halos, and spots were still unscrupulously expanding, smearing and polluting their visual field. In the end, they almost lost the meaning of analysis. There were only deformed bloodstains that interweaved into twisted and ever-changing patterns that were changing rapidly. The problem of the live stream continued to worsen, and there was no sign of it getting better. What's going on? At this moment, even Marlin and the others on the circular conference table couldn't hold back anymore. President Abner, on the other hand, quickly made a judgment. It seems that the operation team is under attack. As he spoke, he looked at the Pope of 100 Communities. He was probably the only one among all the participants who had multiple perspectives. However, the Pope was still indifferent, and he seemed to be in a trance if one looked closely. He didn't respond to Abner's gaze at all. Abner shook his head slightly and turned around to consult a key person who was only separated from him by Marlin and hadn't spoken much. Chairman Mao, should we ensure the quality of the live broadcast? The so-called Director Mao was probably the most casually dressed person at the scene. He was sitting behind the conference table, and only a red and green floral shirt could be seen on his upper body. A pair of aviator sunglasses hung around his neck. It was as if he was projecting the beautiful scenery of the Sunshine Coast. One could imagine what the lower half of his body looked like. This was the truth. Not only was this Director Mao a veteran extraordinaire, he was also an independent director of Quantum Holdings in the secular world and the main liaison for the Deep Blue Project. He was practically the highest representative of Quantum Holdings in the inner world. However, unfortunately, he was currently on vacation and was in the Gold Coast. He was forced to attend the meeting, so he was somewhat unwilling and yawned nonstop. However, at this moment, his expression finally tensed up. The vertical wrinkles on his forehead also stood up, and he looked very serious. That's right, we are now an operation team directly under the Apocalypse Laboratory, and we have been attacked. This is a very serious matter. Director Mao was still describing the incident when someone interjected, "When will the live broadcast signal come back?" Director Mao acted as if he hadn't heard anything. The problem right now is the safety of the operation team members. Before he even finished speaking, the messy broadcast screen suddenly cut away from the blood-colored haze and restored the image of the Band City passenger terminal in broad daylight. However, the perspective of the live broadcast had already undergone a clear change. The angle that belonged to Captain Jimmy and was directly facing Mr. M.O. had already disappeared. To be more precise, it was in the form of a painting within a painting. It had shrunk to a small area in the upper right corner, and what appeared on the main screen was a side view from the lake's surface to the terminal. From this angle, only half of Mr. Mo's back and shoulders could be seen as he sat in a wheelchair. There was also the ever-expanding anomaly that had already lost its flesh and was more like a translucent bubble of lava than an area of 20 square meters in front of him. F***ck, what is that? The mushed-mouth ape? The answer was right in front of them, but none of the audience dared to confirm it. At this moment, the internal radio waves of the operation team in Band City transformed into urgent syllables that appeared in the audience's ears. Captain, Jimmy, he's been swallowed. The formatted space structure has been destroyed. It's greatly weakened. attempting to replace the main axis. Application denied. Deep Blue's platform location has disappeared. Apocalypse array. Blah blah blah. There seemed to be some sensitive word that the corresponding information had been masked. The following information was even more intermittent. However, the vast majority of the audience present possessed rich combat experience. They could make guesses and understand some of the situation. As it turned out, what Mr. M.O. wanted was Captain Jimmy. A more professional term would be a high-end combat machine directly under the Apocalypse laboratory, or even the most cutting-edge 7th-generation dynamo core. Generally speaking, the roots of Jimmy's operation team were still a tightly controlled secret. However, the present virtual venue was the gathering place of the world's strongest experts. There was still a considerable portion of people who understood the crux of the matter. Their gazes unconsciously turned towards Director Mao again. The latter also began to slam the table. Vile. Vile. If he could restrain his expression a little more, perhaps it would have been more realistic. Even Dr. Pan could see it. Deep Blue and Apocalypse are at loggerheads because of the 7th-generation dynamo core. So it wasn't just a rumor. Tian Bang wasn't too interested in this. He was more concerned about the details displayed in the live broadcast. At present, the operation team had clearly fallen into an extremely awkward situation. The captain had been swallowed, and the formatted space had fallen into a leaderless state. It had to be rearranged, but the following situation didn't seem quite right. As a top-notch burner, Tian Bang very quickly discovered the abnormality from the operation team's password. Why can't the main axis be replaced? The authority of the commander should be handed over in sequence. The authority didn't pass. Dr. Pan's attention quickly shifted from the level of gossip to the professional domain. He made a professional judgment, but he soon fell into a state of confusion. Why? Since it's directly under the Apocalypse laboratory, it's most likely the 7th-generation dynamo core. How could there be such a low-level bug in authority transfer? Why is it a bug? There's obviously another possibility. Tian Bang stared at the blood-colored bubble in the projection area and said in a low voice, "Why can't it be Captain Jimmy, the commander, who hasn't completely lost his ability to command and hasn't completely lost contact with the other operation team members? He's clearly been swallowed. Looking at that monster's appearance, it can't possibly have digested him along with his exoskeleton. Oh, could it be that the Deep Blue walkers under the control of the 7th-generation dynamo core have a qualitative leap in their ability to survive and communicate in harsh environments? That's why I said that these people shouldn't be called Deep Blue walkers. Apocalypse walkers should be more accurate." Tian Bang nodded, then shook his head. "The problem is that we don't know the nature and composition of the so-called mushed-mouth ape's stomach space, right?" Dr. Pan shrugged. "Think about its saliva. It's not a magma lake inside, but a sulfuric acid pool." The corner of Tian Bang's mouth hooked up. Maybe it's not a sulfuric acid pool or a magma lake inside, but a simple space bag. At least looking at it right now, I can't recognize that fellow. There's no similarity between that fellow, an ape, or lava. At this time, from the perspective of the live broadcast, the blood-colored bubble that had swallowed Captain Jimmy seemed to have passed its peak period of transformation and was beginning to shrink. But its composition, at least in terms of density, didn't conform to people's logical understanding. It naturally became denser and denser. On the contrary, the blood-colored light was becoming thinner and thinner. Many times, a portion of the area would become somewhat transparent after a burst of undulations. It was like an illusory soap bubble. It seemed as if it could be blown away with a single breath. But the problem was that, after the initial panic, the operation team had already begun a limited counterattack. All physical and energy ammunition were directed towards the blood-colored bubble. Attack! Attack! At least 5 Deep Blue walkers launched their attacks from the surface of the lake, from the sky, and from the distant commanding height. The firepower interweaved into a net and converged at the visible weak points of the bubble. It seemed as if they wanted to rescue their own captain. But Mr. M.O., the instigator of everything, wasn't affected in the slightest. It seemed as if he was directly judged as a passerby. This passerby also didn't have any intention of interfering. He only played with the fruit he had just plucked with his fingertip. He allowed the astonishing firepower of the deep blue walkers to pour down on the increasingly weak, blood-colored bubble. The problem was, whether it was the metal bullets, high-explosive gunpowder, or energy blasts, regardless of whether they were supported by the format of fire, all of them were like clay oxen entering the sea after entering the blood-colored bubble. They disappeared without a sound. Tian Bang said decisively, "This is absolutely not the structural model of a flesh and blood body. This fellow is highly energized. And then, it's relatively easy to mold. It's a natural building material." Dr. Pan was simply repeating Mr. Mo's previous description. This was also the only basis. Tian Bang asked, "What is a highly malleable energized building material used to construct?" Before his voice fell, the blood-colored bubble really did turn into a soap bubble in the live broadcast. It burst noiselessly in a form that didn't have any texture. The howling net of firepower directly pierced through the pier's walkway in the area it had originally covered. It conveniently tore apart the 7 or 8 cars parked behind it. For a time, the sound of explosions rang incessantly. Gravel splashed in all directions, forcing the nearby veteran and the others to nearly jump into the lake. It was a belated display, but it was meaningless. The mushed-mouth ape disappeared along with the blood-colored bubble. At the same time, the fully armed Captain Jimmy also disappeared. That 300-kilogram top-notch creation that was a combination of man and machine had disappeared without a trace. Yes, disappeared. Tian Bang felt that this was the most accurate way to describe it. He couldn't experience any of the so-called devouring texture. He only felt that this was a magic show that had occurred in front of the world's apex powerhouses. Captain Jimmy himself wasn't much, but he was the embodiment of the Apocalypse Laboratory's most cutting-edge research result. Had all traces of its existence been erased just like that? Tian Bang only felt that this was too absurd. At this time, it was Director Mao in the flowery shirt who knocked on the virtual ring-shaped conference table with a deafening sound. "This is a disgrace. This is an extraordinary humiliation. Why the hell are we still doing a live broadcast?" The live broadcast screen began to blur, as if it had heard his command. It looked as if the signal was about to be cut off. At this moment, someone sitting one person away from him also knocked on the table. "Continue." Abner's feminine voice was piercing like a sharp blade cutting through the air at this moment. Just a few milliseconds later, at least 3 to 5 powerhouses said in unison, "A painting within a painting." Chapter 875. It turned out that among people of the same level, there were some who were sharper than others. Similarly, there were also some who were more reserved. If not for Director Mao's order to cut off the signal, even if the extraordinary audience had seen through the trick, they wouldn't have exposed the truth in a tone that bordered on losing their composure in public. In front of the circular conference table, Director Mao spread his hands innocently. Under the high-resolution projection effect, the well-developed hairs on his forearms were clearly visible. But in the eyes of many, this extraordinary businessman, who was even more successful than Buhuan Gold back then, had sinister thoughts that were much more complicated than superficial hair. After being reminded, most of the participants stared at the small picture-in-picture area in the upper right corner of the live broadcast and quickly captured the most crucial information. Captain Jimmy, who had clearly disappeared, had retreated to a corner of the live broadcast, but the filthy perspective that was presented in the form of a picture-in-picture was still there. It was still the same blood-colored spots that were twisted and densely woven. There was no entry point for analysis, but it was still changing and had some sort of vitality. This existence alone had already formed a contradiction with the reality that it had disappeared. And if combined with the goal that people had been discussing and scheming about, it would quickly transform into a predictable explosive point. Captain Jimmy had disappeared from this world, but he still existed. So, where did he exist? Zoom in, zoom in. People like General Kenny, who had gone crazy, had already begun to bang the table and jeer, demanding that the live broadcast switch the small area of the picture-in-picture back to the main perspective. His request had not been met. In fact, it was a little presumptuous to obtain more information through a simple live broadcast. Dr. Pan, for example, had his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He even used the laboratory resources to strip down the transmitted data from the live broadcast and perform corresponding analysis, but he still couldn't find any pattern. He asked Tian Bang again, and the latter, who was trying to imagine Captain Jimmy's current situation, hesitantly said, "The only thing I can be sure of is that Jimmy's perspective changes greatly, which is completely different from the previous static view of the live broadcast. Extrapolating from normal environmental conditions, he should be moving or even rolling. But if there really is a normal environment should be an extravagant hope. And then? You're already making wild guesses. How can there be anything else?" In fact, Tian Bang had other ideas. The changes in the shape of the blood-colored spots, including the brightness and dimming of the luminosity, and even the ripples caused by the signal interference, there should be some room for further analysis in the future. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to use the recently popular configuration theory? But no matter what, he had to have first-hand information. As for where the first-hand information was, it obviously depended on the provider of the livestream service. If Tian Bang could think of it, the others could as well. "Chairman Mao, what do you think?" President Abner returned to his usual feminine tone. He was neither too fast nor too slow, showing his respectful attitude. Director Mao didn't even blink as he replied non-stop, "I've said it before, this is definitely a vile incident. The Apocalypse Laboratories team stationed in Ban City was hired by the Star Alliance to take on the mission of attacking the cultists. Attacking them was undoubtedly a crime. As partners in all aspects of the Apocalypse experiment, we will communicate with each other. We must quickly reach a consensus and take action against this so-called Mr. M.O., who slaughters the innocent." It was rare that President Abner had the patience to listen to his long-winded speech, or maybe it was because Director Mao spoke too quickly, but he finally found a gap to cut in. "I'm talking about the picture-in-picture." Picture-in-picture? Director Mao appeared to be out of sorts, and didn't seem to be following President Abner's train of thought. The latter smiled and directly pointed it out. "Director Mao, Captain Jimmy's perspective is still there, isn't it? He seems to still exist in a certain area and maintains signal contact with the outside world. Of course, we don't know if this is purely a signal from the equipment or if it's good news that both the human and the computer are still there. But before the results are confirmed, we should. In fact, everyone has more positive expectations." Director Mao looked around. Sure enough, there were only two types of people in the virtual venue, those staring at the livestream and those staring at him. These people cast the so-called positive expectations, gaze at him. Their eyes were bright and burning. Speaking of which, when he voted in favor of sharing the livestream resources, he didn't expect this situation at all. After a rare second of hesitation, Director Mao followed Abner's rhythm with some reluctance. "It would be great if that's the case, but we don't have the information to support it at the moment." President Abner pressed close. "There will be. The Apocalypse Lab should have it. As a comprehensive partner, be it Quantum Corporation, the Deep Blue Lab, or the Ability User Society, we are all willing to contribute and jointly decipher this information." Director Mao's expression was solemn. The wrinkles on his forehead and between his eyebrows formed a cross again as he tried to find his rhythm. Of course, we wouldn't have provided the corresponding livestream service otherwise. As everyone can see, the price is heavy. Speaking of which, at a time like this, the efficiency must be higher if we directly face the key issues and key people. Pope of the 100 Collections, what do you think? This was an excellent shift of the ball, and the method of blurring the focus was excellent. The participants began to look in all directions and listen in all directions. At the same time, they paid attention to the size of the livestream as well as the topic of conversation in the venue, for fear of missing a crucial detail. The Pope of the 100 Collections was also smiling, but he also took a longer time to respond. That's why I've been asking for everyone's opinion. Now that things have come to this, is Mr. M.O. being driven by a tender heart, or is he trying to declare something? Only by unraveling this riddle will we be able to take corresponding actions later on. Because of Director Mao, the livestream provided by Deep Blue, and the Apocalypse Lab, as well as the collected information and data, we might have found an opportunity to crack this riddle. Alright, it was back to square one again. Director Mao was sure that he had been cruelly surrounded, but he couldn't blame anyone else. After witnessing the unexpected harvest of the picture-in-picture, his greed had arisen on the spur of the moment, and it had aroused public anger. Again, who would have expected that Mr. M.O. would actually make such a big mistake, and present the place that everyone coveted in front of everyone in such a manner? It was that place without a doubt, right? Up until now, all the heavyweight conclusions were just inferences. But the continuous changes in events, although not to the point of being a solid hammer, were still like the chisels in the hands of craftsmen, knocking down the originally thick and heavy barrier bit by bit, exposing the outline of the truth. From now on, all that was needed was a little bit of imagination to more or less sketch out the entire truth. It was precisely this little bit that made the high-end people present wary, but it also inevitably stimulated gambling-like expectations. At times like this, as long as they were a little bit earlier than others, Captain Jimmy, who was a little bit earlier, and the Apocalypse Lab behind him, thus became the target of everyone's jealousy. Director Mao couldn't cut it in time, and couldn't cut it, so he naturally became the target of focus fire. Now, apart from throwing up his hands, he could only say some strange words and mock himself. You've gone around in such a big circle, but you can't even strangle someone to death with a knot. Why bother? Besides, he's right there. Just ask him directly. There was a sudden momentary silence in the virtual venue. Director Mao's words actually didn't have the effect of striking a blow to the head. They were just absurd. Would Mr. M.O. pay attention to you directly if you asked him directly? But on further thought, if he didn't pay attention, why would he openly expose himself? For a moment, the venue was filled with hesitation. A considerable number of them looked at one another, till someone ventured, "Why don't we have a talk? Talk about how to take Gong Chi's old life." "Shut up, you old bastard. Let's talk about serious business. Who's going to talk?" At this moment, the operation team's rescue operation had already lost its meaning. A few Deep Blue walkers stopped. They stopped at the scene of the incident with a dignified and awkward posture. Stopping was already like this, so there was no need to mention going forward to talk. If they forced it, it might be another Captain Jimmy. As for the last person to talk to Mr. M.O., Goto Masayoshi, he had already died without a complete corpse. The surrounding Heavenly Nations people had also pretty much dispersed. Looking around, there was actually no one suitable to talk to Mr. M.O. in the vicinity of the passenger terminal. It really isn't easy to find someone. Their status isn't equal. The Pope of Baiji rubbed his bald head and smiled amiably. "Why don't I go ask?" Someone immediately objected, "Don't. It was so unpleasant just now. It won't look good if we fight again because of a disagreement." Of course, the synchronized translation of the participants was, "What if you take the opportunity to secretly give it to him?" That being said, If the Pope of Baiji wanted to take the initiative to communicate with Mr. Mo, no one present could stop him. Perhaps it had already begun. In a moment of desperation, someone spoke indiscriminately. Why don't we let this person participate as well? Let that Luo, someone pass on a message. Fortunately, this person didn't break his brain from the anxiety. He forcefully swallowed the word, Nan, back down. Even so, the expression in Ouyang Chen's eyes behind the smooth lenses made him break out in a cold sweat. Tianbang, who was watching the excitement, let out a heh. Speaking of Luo Nan, when the situation developed to this degree, the sensitive speech came to an end. The affairs of the world were like this. It was better to have less trouble than less trouble. Previously, the secret of the alternate space was guarded to the death. Quite a few people here hated that they couldn't gang up and attack. But once there was a gap, they all thought of playing tricks. To put it bluntly, they were all people with great families and businesses. They could eat and drink to their heart's content just by opening their mouth. Who would be willing to give up wealth and glory and gamble their lives? If Mr. Mo had calculated this point and intentionally acted this way, then his methods alone were enough to show his brilliance. Just as he was pondering, he heard someone shout, "Oh, he's looking over again." Chapter 876. Everyone's gazes turned to the live broadcast at the same time, but soon intermittent boos rang out. The reason was simple. The one looking over wasn't Mr. Mo, who had been a passerby for a long time, but the female assistant behind him. The first person to issue a warning was an extraordinaire. Even in the circle of his own kind, being directly looked down upon like this was quite humiliating. It was hard to avoid a few retorts. "Are you all blind? What did Mr. Mo just tell her?" "Is that so?" "It seems so." Someone testified. Mr. Mo had indeed called out to Inlo, and the latter had bent down to listen carefully. Since it was a side view, it was impossible to see what he had instructed her. But in a few seconds, Inlo straightened her body and turned her head slightly, giving the camera a clearer view of her side profile. The camera and the line of sight were at the wrong angle, but it was obvious that Inlo was looking in his direction. At this moment, Mr. Mo nodded to the veteran in the distance. He extended his thumb and pinky and made a hand gesture, indicating that he had something to do. The wheelchair beneath him turned around nimbly and headed towards the cruise that was docked at the pier. He had actually left just like that. There were no longer any obstacles between Mr. Mo and the cruise. Perhaps the Fusang Divine Tree's great divine treasure system hidden in the endless sunlight was one, but the Pope of the 100 Communities didn't show any intention of stopping him. There were quite a few people who suspected that this extremely intelligent Pope Empress Dowager had already used her geographical advantage to secretly form a connection with Mr. Mo. Hadn't he already volunteered to do it? After Mr. Mo left, Inlo, who had been acting like a personal member, didn't follow him. On the contrary, she turned her body towards the lake and nodded in that direction. The live broadcast paused for a moment. The camera language perfectly displayed the ignorance of the owner of the camera. Of course, he was definitely receiving instructions. 2 seconds later, the coverage area of the live broadcast began to shrink and rapidly converged on Ainli's surroundings. It was obvious that the owner of the live broadcast was currently approaching Ainlo. In the virtual venue, there were noises of "lock Mr. Mo down," but most people still maintained a high level of interest in the unforeseen event. In the end, the camera gave Ainlo a close-up. From this moment on, the second-in-command of the Blood Flame Order, who only had a little fame in the inner world, had entered the sights of at least 2/5 of the extraordinaries in the world. However, her eyes were still a little out of focus. She didn't seem to understand Mr. Mo's arrangement, nor did she know anything about the live broadcast. She was just a narrator. "What Sir means is that you can start bidding now." The virtual venue was silent for a short period of time. A considerable number of people looked at each other and exchanged glances. And on a level that was invisible to the audience, The information exchanged in secret should be 1,000 times more than this. With great difficulty, someone finally followed up, "That's direct enough. Are you sure he didn't participate?" Or perhaps, the vast majority of people added a connection in their minds. Their gazes, whether direct or indirect, revolved around Ouyang Chen and Her Majesty Empress Wu. Unfortunately, there was no response. Enlu didn't explain further after that. Instead, she turned to the veterans and comforted them. In the blink of an eye, the amount of energy and tongues spent on this had already exceeded the so-called announcement of the price. Moreover, the difference was still growing. This also made all the participants certain that they couldn't obtain any more information from the live broadcast. What made them even more annoyed was that the most crucial picture-in-picture had stopped. It was as if an absurd play had suddenly come to an end. The abstract changes that could cause the imaginations of the extraordinaries present to run wild had suddenly locked onto a single instant. Even if all the participants' gazes were focused on it, they couldn't move it even a little bit. Several seconds later, that small window turned into an irritating snowflake noise that drowned out the last bit of people's thoughts. F***ck, this is provocation. Someone slammed the table and stood up. His stocky figure looked extremely intimidating, but unfortunately, there were only a few who responded. The vast majority of people's thoughts were far from reaching the point where they needed to display extreme emotions. They only grew like weeds and flew around like mosquitoes. What's the meaning of this? Is he trying to show that he can control the transmission of information from the alternate dimension? Why is he in such a hurry to show this? Is he tired of living? Does he really want us to bid that alternate dimension? Cooperation and development? That's so smart. Is he overthinking things? Maybe he's simply saying this to that operation team, to the people behind them. He's saying that he wants to use money to redeem them. Inside and outside the venue, the interaction between many people and many levels continued to heat up. However, the significance of the virtual venue itself wasn't that important anymore. I need to reflect on how a mere appraisal meeting has come to this stage. Amidst the buzzing noise of the virtual venue, President Abner gently stroked the yellow beard on his cheek. He maintained a state of communication with Director Mao on Marlin's side, but the topic of conversation changed extremely quickly. The broadcast from T-City has stopped, but I heard that Kadru's soul has returned to his body. No matter what he does, he's still a member of the society. Today, his soul was heavily injured, and the consequences are hard to predict. The society has to do something about it. In a private conversation, Director Mao was much more frank this time. Well, we're the ones who contacted Kadru. As the person directly responsible, we're the ones who can't shirk the responsibility. Don't even think about it. We definitely won't let such important research material go. Is it Tianqi who's not letting it go, or is it Deep Blue who's not letting it go? We can discuss this issue after the meeting. President Abner laughed. Why do we have to discuss after the meeting? Of course, it's not good to end it in a hurry. Why don't we take a break first? The last sentence was directly transmitted to the ears of every participant. Take a break? At present, the situation has already exceeded the scope of the original topic of the meeting. Due to the limitations of the conditions, there are still many people who haven't had the time to attend the meeting and participate in the discussion. For example, His Excellency the Priestess of the Order of Justice. Why don't we take a break for now? Tomorrow, or perhaps a few days later, we can discuss it again. Most of the participants were somewhat tempted. In reality, there were indeed many people who needed to gather their scattered thoughts. They also needed some time and space to settle their thoughts. But then again, if the meeting was adjourned, there was no doubt that it would give some of the true bigwigs the opportunity to form alliances. Perhaps the entire situation would be completely different during the next meeting. It was even uncertain whether there would be a second half of the meeting. Many people fell into a dilemma. The problem was that as the organizer of the meeting, President Abner had sufficient authority to enforce this suggestion. The next second, before some people could voice their objections, Marlin, who had received a signal from President Abner with his eyes, knocked on the table. "Then we'll take a break. As for the resumption time, we will inform you later." Someone cursed out loud. However, the broken signal connection turned all of this into meaningless nonsense. Most people didn't have the leisure to care about this. They needed to spend more effort to lock onto the truly meaningful information from this conference that had almost no conclusion. They also needed to use their own connections and other resources to search for the mine and dig out the real gold. Of course, for some people who currently had first-hand information, it would be even better if they could seize the opportunity to capture a new entry point. The plans of the higher-ups always needed to be executed by the people at the bottom. Right now, in the operation team at North Mountain Lake, Team Deputy Mend had received the latest order. This order bypassed their direct superior, Supervisor Bai, who did not really fulfill her responsibilities, and directly took command through the internal authority channel. Lock the original format space, settings and captain's main authority. Activate full sensory mode. Until there is a clear change of command, maintain this state. Mend confirmed his new supervisor. At the same time, he also confirmed that this old superior, who was slightly younger than him, was still in a bad mood. Therefore, he first opened his mouth to accept the order. After a while, he carefully added, "Supervisor Yen, currently, the Apocalypse Array can no longer detect Captain Jimmy's signal. I'm afraid we won't be able to hold on here for too long." Yen Yongbu's voice sounded like he was chewing on ice. "I will activate the superior structure to give you the necessary support." "This. Aren't you in T-City? If it's consumed, care about what you should care about." "Yes, sir." Men subconsciously straightened his back, causing the entire deep blue walker to buzz. At the same time, the 7th-generation dynamo core that was deeply implanted in his brain and spinal nervous system emitted a clear electrical signal. It actively connected to the archetype format hub of him and all the other team members around him. A layer of faint yet real and wonderful structure spread out from the distant void. It also seemed to be growing from the inside out. The two ends, near and far, resonated with each other and fused together at a higher level that surpassed the spiritual sea. In less than a second, Yen Yongbu's superior architecture had crossed thousands of kilometers of the Pacific Ocean, arrived at Osaka, and exerted its influence. However, this function was rather restrained. It was only a template with a weak stickiness. It helped the formatted space on this side, which was on the verge of collapsing due to the lack of the main axis, to do a simple splicing and gluing. At the same time, the missing structures that had been glued together formed an even stronger magnetic force between each other. Then, he used this magnetic force to search for the signals of the main axis that had been cut off. As for whether it was useful or not, Mend, who was on the front lines, wasn't sure. It wasn't just because the signal was so weak that it far exceeded the limits of his perception. It was also because after the superior structure was laid down, frontline personnel like them only existed as antennae. They no longer needed to undertake the function of analysis. It should be useful. The long-range support of the Apocalypse Array consumed a lot of electricity. Men's active thoughts gradually settled in the deepest part of his heart until he entered an extremely quiet and pure state. Whether Captain Jimmy's signal was there or not was no longer a problem for him to consider. Chapter 877. At the intersection of a certain residential area in Nade District, a black nanny van was parked by the roadside with its engine off. However, Hai Jing, who was in the driver's seat, was not idle at all. Other than answering phone calls, he was adjusting his schedule. When he finally had a chance to catch his breath, he looked at his watch. It was almost 5 minutes past the agreed time. He sighed and made another call. "Emoya! Open the door." The door at the back opened, and Emoya stepped in with her handbag and sat in her seat. However, the other seats were empty. She and Haijing were the only two people in the car. Emoya tied up her hair and asked, "Where are the others?" Meng Fei took them to the venue first. Unlike some people who are 10 times lazier after one trip to the music festival. By the way, is there a guest at home? I saw people coming in and out of your house, who would come to visit in the middle of the afternoon. A bunch of annoying people. Let's go. It was rare for Emoya to be agitated. Haijing didn't ask any more questions. He started the car and changed the topic. Just now, the company's IT department came to ask about a bug in your personal information retrieval system. It's probably a bug in the SCA's debugging system. Next week's event won't be easy. I happen to be working there, so why don't you let me know? Emoya. Got it. Emoya's irritation clearly continued. Haijing felt a little strange this time. He couldn't help but turn his head and wanted to ask, but he saw a slender figure coming out of the residential area from the back window. Rui-1 is going out too? It seems like there's an activity at school. Emoya opened the carriage door and called out from afar. Rui-1, come here. Rui-1, who was dressed in the school uniform, maintained her silence. She moved over to the side of the car and only replied with a "Big sis Emoya" when she heard Haijing's greeting. Brother Jing. His words and tone were exactly the same as Luonan's. Emoya put on the demeanor of an elder sister. Rui-1, go to school? I can give you a lift on the way. What kind of activities did the school have on Sunday afternoons? Also, how was it on the way? Haijing felt that something was amiss. He quickly calculated the route in his mind, but in the end, he could only form a large triangle on the map. However, as a manager, she had to solve this problem. He also smiled at the thin and somewhat autistic girl and beckoned her to get in the car. However, Rui-1 didn't appreciate it. No need. After simply spitting out these two words, Rui-1 bowed in this direction. She was polite and distant, and then directly walked away. Haijing raised her eyebrows. Acting like an elder sister, huh? It's because you're here. I have a good relationship with her. The little fellow is independent, so you don't have to worry about her. Yeah, he's just like his brother, a liar. Haijing was confused by Emoya's words. The only thing he could be sure of was that Emoya was currently in a bad mood. It was best not to provoke her. The nanny van started moving, and Haijing soon realized that there were many other cars that started moving at the same time. There was one in front and two behind. They were all very sturdy models of the same model, sandwiching the nanny van in the middle. It was fine at first, but when they left the neighborhood and got onto the main road, Haijing's nerves tensed up. Is this kidnapping? Emoya snorted. Bodyguards. Haijingdo forgot to drive and turned his head to ask, Emoya, which big shot has booked you? I hope that's the case. Emoya's words had just left her mouth when the car in front suddenly slowed to a stop. The car behind followed, activating the safety distance control function, and the nanny van was stuck in place. Haijing only cared about turning his head to talk. He fell forward due to inertia, and his ribs hit the steering wheel. Under these circumstances, he really didn't know whether or not to believe Emoya's words. Isn't this kind of bodyguard a bit too rough? A knock on the window rang out and a tall, thin, and vigorous figure appeared outside the driver's seat. He had a familiar face. Hello, Mr. Haijing. Are you free? Haijing's ability to recognize faces was quite good. After staring blankly for 2 seconds, he recalled a string of memories from the depths of his heart. Last year's university birthday, the municipal square, the first performance after signing a contract with the band Mountain Creek, the extraordinary person in the underground passageway. Of course, there was also the close relationship between this person and Luonan. He remembered that when he first met Rui-1, this person seemed to be there as well. Me, Mr. Chin? It's me, Chin Ikuan. Chin Ikuan greeted him through the car window. We meet again. I've just been hired to be Mrs. Mo Ya's full-time driver. Please take care of me in the future. Hai Jing clearly knew that the matter wasn't that simple, but he still asked a very stupid question. Who hired you? You can think of it as Luo Nan. Emoya replied from the back seat. It felt more like a sigh. The nanny car started up once more, and Hai Jing had already switched from the driver's seat to the front passenger seat in a daze. As a manager, he wanted to get to the bottom of things, but he didn't know where to start. As his line of sight shifted back and forth, he suddenly saw Rui-wan, who had just left coldly, burying her head into another flying car near the entrance of the residential district. It was a sports car with a more distinctive style. The sports car quickly started up, and soon it ran alongside them. The driver of the car even pressed down the window to greet them. Teacher Cat Eyes? Cat Eyes gave him a smile from the driver's seat. The car sped up, leaving the fleet of cars behind in the blink of an eye. For some people, the world has already changed. It's quite troublesome to adapt to it. But in this sort of situation, they still want to hide it from everyone, especially from their family. This is undoubtedly making things awkward. It's meaningless. Cat Eyes' current state wasn't all that great after being tormented by her boss for quite a while in the wee hours of the morning. She let the car go into autopilot mode after entering the high-speed magnetic rail. She simply curled up in her seat and chatted with Rui-wan. You also feel that it's very inconvenient, right? As long as those bureaucrats don't make mistakes, they won't be afraid to do things. So they lick up especially hard. It's very disgusting. Rui-wan sat quietly in the front passenger seat, not responding to this sort of topic. Cat Eyes didn't mind either. Over there was the big boss, and over here was the small boss. The more she interacted with them, the more she knew that these two were unfathomable freaks. Of course, the small boss was a bit cuter. Cat Eyes reached out her hand to touch Rui-wan's jade-like face as she thought this. But before her fingertips could reach Rui-wan's face, the little girl in the front passenger seat was like a translucent bubble. She suddenly burst and disappeared. All that was left was a tiny ripple in the void. Oh, there was also the whisper she left behind. Thank you, Sister Cat Eyes. TSK. She's also an awkward child. Rui-wan relied on Cat Eyes to leave her home normally. She didn't need to conceal anything in front of people who knew her inside out. She simply crossed the barrier of the void and stepped into the cloud world. She felt an abnormality the moment she entered this void. The stability of the void she was in was very questionable. It was as if many traps were buried beneath the surging flow of clouds and mist that could collapse at any time. The invisible depths of the void seemed to have turned into quicksand that was scoured by an underground river. It had lost the stability she had achieved over the years. Rui-wan opened her mouth, wanting to call out to Luo Nan who was somewhere unknown. But in the end, she didn't make a sound. She wasn't used to addressing Luo Nan as such. Brother. She didn't want to call him. Luo Nan wasn't polite enough. Therefore, her normal behavior was to completely forego addressing him and directly communicate with him. The transmission of sound waves was actually the least effective in the current situation. Rui-wan was more used to using her mental senses to capture Luo Nan's location and directly teleport over. But the current situation didn't seem to be suitable. Rui-wan suppressed the power she was used to. She simply pondered for a moment before turning her body. She didn't circle around the half-collapsed void trap. Instead, she directly plunged into them, allowing her body to sink into the depths of the unfathomable region. Rui-wan entered the misty maze in the next second. The void barrier, which originally required the strength of an extraordinary to go all out in order to blast open, had already turned into a nearly rotten wooden board. Anyone could casually enter. Of course, this was only limited to the surrounding region. There was nothing much to say. This was the effect of Luo Nan's power. There was still a certain distance between Rui-wan and Luo Nan right now. Luo Nan had already discovered her arrival, but he was unable to split himself for the time being. He had no way to greet her. Rue Wen knew from this that Luo Nan's current situation wasn't too good. She pursed her lips and didn't make a sound. She followed her senses and made her way through the misty maze that had no concept of up or down. She hadn't been here for a few days, but this world gave her the feeling that there were some changes. The trillions of fragments seemed to be trying out some sort of new arrangement, but they weren't able to completely take shape. They were like a pot of thick rice soup, but there were some special textures in specific regions. For example, Rue Wen saw the silhouette of a person. His skin was dark and heavy, and he wore combat clothes. He was wrapped within the thick mist. He seemed to be twitching, but his body was clearly restricted. The texture of the surrounding region wasn't of the rice soup type. Instead, it was more like a tangled ball of silk rope. To be exact, it was more like pieces of a spiderweb that trapped mosquitoes and flies. As for the person within the spiderweb, Rue Wen didn't recognize him. The newcomer clearly sensed Rue Wen's arrival. His eyes were half opened and half closed. He wanted to open them, but he couldn't. His arm was still struggling within the mist, but he was ultimately unable to break free. Clearly, his self-awareness wasn't enough to break free from this spiderweb-style confinement, as well as the deeper confinement strength. Rue Wen also noticed that there were several transparent needles piercing into the area of this person's head. The front end penetrated deep into the skull and even the other organs of the body. An extremely long thread extended from the back end of the needle. It was connected to a certain region within the misty maze. There was a rich and varied energy and information that flowed and exchanged between them. Rue Wen was soon convinced that the back end of the needle was Luo Nan's current location. She didn't pay any more attention to the figure within the spiderweb. She followed this guidance and continued to make her way through the maze. It didn't take long for the rough house that Luo Nan had constructed in the depths of the misty maze to appear before her eyes. It was just that most of the edges of the rough house had already melted away at this moment. It formed an extremely smooth and gradual transition with the sandstorm region even further away. The further she went, the fewer the flying fragments became. It felt more and more stable. As for the enormous withered tree in the centermost region, it was hidden within the flowing ash-gray mist. It was like the work of a photographer, but it was also like she was observing some virtual reality. Reality and illusion were tightly blended together. Chapter 878. In the end, Rue Wen's perception was extraordinary. She suddenly stopped halfway through. She stopped in front of an extremely blurry boundary and hesitated. If she went any further in, it would probably result in a bad influence. However, the summoning intent inside was very clear. Rue Wen hesitated for a second, but in the end, she still stepped forward into the area ahead. Fine waves gently rippled out following Rue Wen's movements, forming marvelous ripples in the void. Horizontal and vertical waves rose and fell, dense and alternating. They reverberated back and forth, erasing the surface color of the mist. This scene, which was originally a relatively simple fusion of the virtual and the real, suddenly had many blurry silhouettes and colors. It was like a projection that wasn't quite successful. Layers and layers interweaved together. Rue Wen also saw that there were a few structures that were already relatively clear. They were similar to mountain peaks, rivers, buildings, and even more refined vehicles. They suddenly collapsed, and then they were reconstructed under the push of some sort of continuous but relatively chaotic force. It was just that there was already a clear difference from the scene before her. And so, Rue Wen knew that Luo Nan should have some new ideas and new harvests in the construction of his sandwich domain. But she could tell from this part of the scene that his results were still relatively weak. The boundary between the real and the imaginary was not clearly sorted out. It was quite sensitive to external stimuli, and its internal structure was not clear enough. It lacked stability. As the sole designer, Luo Nan didn't seem to be ready yet. In fact, Luonan's gaze was always focused on Rui when after she entered this area. He attempted to analyze her deeper nature in order to make this area better accommodate her existence. Rui Wen was very happy to cooperate, but Luonan's ability was truly insufficient to complete all of this in a short amount of time. Luonan gave up after a few adjustments. Rui Wen also took the initiative to restrain her energy and adjust her state. She made herself closer to nothingness in order to avoid bringing even greater stimulation to this area. And so, Rui Wen entered the space of the withered tree. This space completely imitated the structure of the withered tree of the real world. It was as narrow and small as the real world was. Though it was narrow and small, the structure of this space looked much more stable with the blueprint provided by Luo Zhongheng. It was no different from the real world. Rui Wen found Luonan without expending any effort. Right now, Luonan was in the resting room at the lower level of the tree-hole space. He sat on a circular seat leaning against the wall with his head lowered. His breathing was long and drawn out, but an unstable situation would occasionally appear in the middle of it. His back was bent, his arms were crossed, his legs were crossed, and he was sitting very openly. However, if one looked closely, one would find that the structure of his body and the details of his movements were very unnatural. As he breathed, many parts of his body appeared stiff or distorted. In front of him, there was a pile of metal components, all of which were exoskeleton configurations. They were in a mess and were not taken care of. Bloodstains could also be seen in the messy pile of spare parts. His injuries are very serious, Rui Wen stated the facts directly. Yeah. Luonan gave a simple response, but he didn't raise his head. In fact, his spine was injured and normal movements were extremely strenuous. His voice was hoarse and weak. Rui Wen didn't say anything more. She just walked forward, and her slender and slightly cold fingers lightly rested on Luonan's neck. She made a slight shift, and she detected many areas of swelling, collapse, and even deeper and more serious injuries. Luonan was immediately unable to maintain his deep state. He shouted loudly, "Stop touching. It's itchy. It hurts." Rui Wen's fingers lifted up as if she had been electrocuted. She froze there, not knowing what to do for a time. "Don't worry. I'm super sensitive right now," Luonan hissed as he spoke. His entire body was trembling. Right now, when he opened his mouth to speak, his entire internal organs twitched slightly. However, there were some things that needed to be explained clearly. The main thing is that the perfect body created by the lamination interference isn't that easy to bear. It was so fun to bully people just now, but now the backlash is life-threatening. I'll help you reposition it. Rui Wen didn't participate in Luonan and Dean Wan's academic research process, so she didn't really understand what a perfect body was. However, she discovered that there were over a dozen bone fractures on Luonan's body from her rough observations just now. His internal organs were also displaced and damaged. If Luonan was a normal person, he would already be struggling for his life in the ICU. Luckily, Luonan was still able to laugh. He really was laughing. "Wait a moment. Let me memorize everything first." Rui Wen still didn't understand. The injuries are quite serious, but these are all the consequences of having an incomplete exoskeleton frame. Not this pile. This is what I stripped off the body of the fellow outside. Cold sweat was dripping down Luonan's cheeks, falling onto the gaps between the exoskeleton fittings. There was even a thin layer of dust on top of these fittings. He nodded with his chin. "It should be these. Master Shou used the rib bones of a ghost ox to process them. Their toughness and transformability are pretty good, but their strength is a bit lacking. Right now, all that's left is a layer of dust. I relied on this toy to forcefully push myself to the perfect body. But right now, there's only this bit left. It has absolutely no value as a reference, so I can only rely on myself. I need to memorize all of the injuries. I need to see where the problems are. Only then can I fix them. I don't want to fall into the same pit next time. Ruewen frowned slightly, but Luonan gasped for breath and continued speaking. Oh, my nervous system is preserved quite well. And right now I'm quite excited. This is the best opportunity. I've prolonged this state because I need to seize the time to record all of the feedback from my intuition. I feel like everything is going to be a mess when I return to my suppressed state. You're here just in time. Help me out as an observer. We'll compare the results later. If you remember clearly, then you'll earn. But if you don't learn from your mistakes, then you'll suffer a huge loss today. Ruewen could see that Luonan was indeed in a rather excited state right now. Though his injuries were serious, his mood was quite high, so much so that he was especially talkative. But the more he was like this, the fiercer the suppression effect would be, and the more severe the consequences would be. In the end, she wouldn't go against Luonan's intentions. She pursed her lips and stared blankly for a few seconds before nodding in agreement. Luonan grinned and projected a work area. Many important details had already been recorded on it. There was also a simple drawing of the human body. The words and text were combined, matching one to the other. Clearly, he had spent quite a bit of effort. Ruewen used her unique sensing ability to understand Luonan's body and soul frame. Her understanding of Luonan's body and soul frame was not inferior to Luonan's. She knew Luonan's progress with just a glance. He could even find some deviations from his own senses, so he pointed them out one by one. Her ability to describe was quite bad, but Luonan was quite alert. As long as she pointed to a location, he would be able to quickly correct it without needing to say much. Oh, this nerve cluster. I didn't even notice it. The relevant area is numb. Luonan gave her a thumbs up. You've written the words very properly. Clearly, Luonan strove to construct a relaxed atmosphere. It was just a pity that Ruewen's sharp perception could easily cut through all of his disguises. You've worked hard. How can it not be tiring to be injured? It must have been really good in front of you. What I'm saying is, Ruewen needed to think about what to say. You've been working very hard with me here. Luonan didn't find her words strange. It was just that when he wanted to console her, sweat soaked into his eyes. His eyes were unbearably dry, and he cut a rather sorry figure for a time. Ruewen immediately reached out to help him wipe it away. Her fingertips didn't touch his pupils, but a cool and refreshing feeling pervaded the air. Io, this move is called Sword Energy Eye Cleansing, right? Luonan continued to liven up the atmosphere, then he explained, You've seen the structure outside. It's true that it was quite tiring to bring you in this state, but your control is excellent. It's much better than I imagined. Plus, I wanted you to come over for the sake of continuous improvement. Right now we're in the stage of collecting data and endlessly experimenting. Speaking of which, do you understand the structure inside? A little bit. It's really troublesome. You've been injured all this time. That's not the right way to describe it. You should say that the existence of this half-baked domain is a constant burden for me. But you need to see that the benefits inside are enormous. Luonan needed to give Ruewen an explanation of the current background. Have you discovered yet? Right now, the core of the domain I've set up around the dead tree is solid. Even though it's also a sandwich biscuit, it basically continues with the balance that you saw last time. I'm talking about relative balance. But the outer region is something I've set up on the spot. Let's call it virtual reality for the time being. It's basically pieced together randomly. But there's really no other way. If I don't do this, a lot of messy energy won't be able to leak out. In addition, I need to use this to deceive people. I need to deceive a lot of people. Ruewen immediately thought of the outer region, the fellow who was entangled in the spider web. It's just one of them. A test subject. I won't go into the details. In short, I've already become the target of public criticism due to my not-so-smart actions this morning. Many people want to pull out my tendons and flay my skin. I definitely can't beat them head on, so I'm using this method to trick them. Yeah, I'm trying to trick them. You're using this? Rue Wen showed a rare display of straightforward doubt towards Luo Nan. Cough. You can't really win people's trust, right? Right now, it really doesn't look good. The logic is chaotic, the rules are incomplete, and there's even some messy interference of consciousness. Luo Nan was a bit embarrassed. Forcefully integrating them into the void world is really difficult for people. The backlash is also quite fierce. However, we still have opportunities. There are conditions. For example, the recoil is quite sufficient. You've seen your big brother's soul cloak, right? There's also the spider web altar. Right now they're endlessly gathering redundant consciousness resources from the sea of consciousness for my use. They're even extracting energy from the abyss region, but it's very messy. Rue Wen hit the nail on the head. This is just like a large-scale biological brain array in the cloud. I still haven't sorted out the core architecture on my side, and there aren't many usable computing nodes. How many people in this world understand the basic concepts of configuration? Snake Tongue, Inlo, Cat Eyes, and a few others aren't very good at it. Speaking of which, you're one of the most important computing nodes. Your little brain is quite clear. The more you understand the situation here, the less worry I'll have. Understand? Rue Wen didn't respond. She just stared at Luo Nan, and there seemed to be specks of light flickering in and out of the depths of her dark pupils. They were like the streams within a deep gorge, occasionally sparkling with light. Chapter 879. Actually, the previous conversation between the two did not affect the progress of Luo Nan's bug catching for his injuries. They naturally entered a state of concentration similar to that of multi-core parallel processing. They coordinated and mobilized their mental resources to resolve all sorts of problems in an orderly manner. This sort of parallel processing model, simulated by the brain, originated from Dean Wan's secret technique of overall planning. Admittedly, it was an incorporeal mana-consuming skill, but for the current Luo Nan, it just so happened to be able to digest the serious excess of computing power resources. As for how Rue Wen did it, only the devil knew. Everything had been going quite smoothly, but Luo Nan's special focus state was broken when Rue Wen cast her gaze over at this moment. This gaze had already exceeded the scope of what Luo Nan was familiar with. Unfortunately, what existed within wasn't any complicated thoughts. Instead, it was some sort of unique method that followed Rue Wen's own logic. Luo Nan instinctively wanted to analyze it, but he didn't know how to start. This caused the unstable state of his domain to fluctuate once more. For a time, he found it a bit hard to bear. He could only adjust himself and subconsciously talk to himself. Are you wondering why I'm using such a complicated and strenuous method? You're under a lot of pressure. Rue Wen's words were like an arrow piercing his heart. Luo Nan grinned wryly, but he felt unexpectedly good chattering like this. Every single one of the people I need to deal with right now have abilities no less than Jin Tong and Gong Qi. I hoodwinked them this morning, but in the end it was just hoodwinking. Those people have their eyes fixed on the cloud world. No, it's very likely that they're looking at the deeper layers. Even if it's the cloud world, there's no room for them to toss and turn. If I'm exposed, then so be it. I might as well forcefully create one. Isn't this taking things for granted? People have to live under pressure. If I don't take this opportunity to pull my strength up by a chunk, then it will certainly be very unsightly when I return. This is a situation where there is no retreat and only advancement. Looking at it from a different perspective, your big brother has indeed found a shortcut to quickly level up. Rue Wen stared at him. You said before that you shouldn't think of shortcuts when doing things. Cough cough. That's the principle of how people conduct themselves. But if a pie really falls from the sky and smashes into our mouths, we can't spit it out, right? Rue Wen didn't ask what the pie was. She didn't open her mouth any longer. She continued to stare at Luo Nan with her extraordinarily serious and deep gaze. And it was under her observation that the truth, hidden behind layers upon layers of mental and material barriers, appeared one after another. Luo Nan formed a connection with the material void, the sea of consciousness, and even the polar domain of the abyss region at the same time. Regardless of the details, the connection twisted time and space and erased the elements such as distance to the greatest extent. As a result, the vast and complicated domains that he could reach were all deeply or shallowly connected to him. Also, because of the special structure, some sort of depression was formed, which absorbed energy and information from all directions and in all forms endlessly. For example, the torrent of information created and stimulated by the billions of domain fragments in the misty maze had no pattern to speak of. If this was a few days ago, the last time Rue Wen came to the tree hole, Luo Nan would have been drowned in the endless stream of information. And now, the source of information had increased by quite a bit. The amount of information seemed to have grown significantly as well, but Luo Nan seemed to be a lot more relaxed when dealing with it. There was an enormous filtering net that couldn't be distinguished clearly. It wasn't just a single layer, but a complex structure that spanned vertically and horizontally. It covered the entire sea of consciousness and even deeper regions. It lay across the center of the surging torrent of information. It carried out precipitation, filtration, analysis. In the end, some rules were sorted out and transported to the most core region. The core of the filtering net was obviously Luo Nan. To be precise, it was a complex projection based on Luo Nan and related concept. The projection seemed to be some sort of religious image from the historical knowledge that Rue Wen had recently learned. To put it simply, it was a god. Luo Nan might not have deliberately created this sort of image, but this entire process of absorption, precipitation, and filtration was destined to accumulate into this sort of structure. Rue Wen could trace even further upwards, but it was meaningless. She watched silently, but her line of sight had already reversed. The image cast into the depths of Rue Wen's eyes very faithfully reflected the complex pulse of the present, but it was never a pure reflection of the present. Before, the echoes flowed in the opposite direction, but now they flowed in the direction of the rippling light of the stream in the depths of her eyes. The frequency of the pulse continued to accelerate, exceeding the scope of the present in the blink of an eye. The pulse continued to accelerate and evolve until it completely lost the outline of the present, transforming into a diffuse and decaying still image. And so it came to an end. This isn't good. Rue Wen didn't know why she was seeing such a scene, but the terrible scene at the end forced her to open her mouth and tell Luo Nan. However, her ability to express herself was truly limited. The more anxious she was to describe it, the more she didn't know where to start. Luo Nan saw her open her mouth and frown, and he could guess a few things. But he already had a vein in his mind. Now that he had advanced to this stage, it was just as he said. There was no retreat. It was impossible for his will to waver. So, he just laughed. I know that you feel that the layer of virtual reality outside is crooked and twisted. The simulator has failed to update. External database detected. Do you wish to connect? Warning. If external database is connected, some functions of the simulator may be unusable. External database has been connected. The prediction function is 73% complete. Do you wish to start the simulator? The simulator has been activated. Scanning the external environment. No simulator vehicle detected. Please select 1. Thinking training mode, 2. Complete mode. The vehicle can be reassembled with the help of the simulator self-assembly and debugging wizard. Minimum requirements for reassembling the vehicle. Specialization in space-time configuration. Level 2 of the Heavenly Stairway. Chapter 880. Why was it that meat pies fell from the sky? It was fine to just look at the lowest requirements. Of course, this was just a joke. The so-called lowest requirements weren't just specialization in space-time configuration and level 4 of the heaven stairway. It was just like how the simulator wasn't just a simulator in the traditional sense. What is this? Rue asked. This was a matter of course. The interface that suddenly popped up and the information window was filled with alien characters. Anyone would be confused. Luonan had said before that he needed Rue to understand more about the situation, so there was no need to hide anything. At most, he would omit a few details that would take a lot of effort to explain. You can think of it as the inheritance my parents left behind. Ah no. One of the precious treasures they left behind. Of course, it also belonged to my grandfather. Remember what I told you before? There are many traces on our planet that belong to a certain or even multiple advanced civilizations. Looking at it from the current situation, even though grandfather and mom and dad can't be considered true pioneers, they are extremely powerful discoverers and translators. They excavated many resources that originated from advanced civilizations and transformed them into resources that we can use. The tree-hole space we're in is like this. The mist maze that hasn't been successfully developed is like this. The virtual brain system you see right now is also like this. You can't understand the characters on it, right? There's nothing I can do about it. It's an alien language. Speaking of which, the virtual brain system is far too complex. I haven't completely understood it yet, so I won't go into details for now. Right now, all you need to know is that I just activated a new function from within. It's extremely useful for the current situation. Rue was the best listener. She didn't utter a single word during Luonan's long speech. She just listened attentively and watched attentively. It was as if Luonan was the only person in the world. There was no need to doubt that she would miss a single shred of information. Luonan gestured to Rue to shift her gaze from his face to the projection area. The virtual brain interface. The central virtual brain galaxy had a structure of millions and millions of stars. It was very complex and dazzling. The outer satellites, especially the exoskeleton system that represented personal equipment, also involved many layers of explanation. Luonan just skimmed over them. Luonan's fingertips and Rue's line of sight finally fell upon another satellite, which was the outer space flying ship. A few days ago, the lonely, dark body of the starship had simply circled around the central virtual brain galaxy in silence. No matter how hard it was stimulated, there was no response. But when Luonan passed the 100-year sequence general education test, as well as the additional offline test, perhaps more importantly, after Luonan made contact with the sunwheel hell in the distant deep space and experienced the baptism of its flood of information, the unreadable state of this satellite was gone forever. At this moment, although the spaceship in outer space was still dark and lifeless, a certain area in the middle of the spaceship was electrified. The light in the area was passing through some of the portholes on the spaceship, turning into fragments of different shapes and flowing out. Amidst the twinkling lights, a relatively complete functional area appeared, the reflection of it. Oh, this area appears to be mini and empty, but it is actually operating normally. Although I can't see its internal structural components too clearly, it is still extremely precise and tight as a whole. It may be illusory, but the way it operates is real. It belongs to the reality of the material world. It's a virtual physical system. Luonan's telepathic thoughts linked with the external neuron, driving the image on the projection to enlarge endlessly, focusing on the sole light source of the spaceship in outer space. As his cultivation continued to rise, the precision of his perception and control over this area continued to rise as well. From a visual perspective, they were like two astronauts walking in space or ghosts floating in the starry sky. They approached the spaceship in outer space ceaselessly and then seeped inside. This area within the spaceship wasn't too spacious compared to the overall structure. The environmental layout was also relatively simple. There was only a single piece of integrated equipment that occupied an area of about 10 square meters. All that was left were the corners. The integrated equipment was like a large beetle lying on the ground, with its head and tail cut off. At the relatively wide front was an arc-shaped interface. Right now, it flickered with the radiance of information. Large amounts of text and diagrams, as well as the constantly switching map and various non-optical imaging effects, made all of this exude a lifelike professional style. Perhaps at this very moment, in a certain corner of the universe, there was such a piece of equipment. It was controlled by some bizarre intelligent life form, carrying out its functions and missions. Luonan constantly fine-tuned the angle of the projection. He was like a photographer, deliberately creating an immersive feeling. Right now, he and Ruewen stood at the top of the tree-hole space. Behind them was the lens and the surrounding nebula. And in front of them was the enormous piece of equipment, even though it only existed within the mini-spaceship of the virtual brain system. Luonan was the operator. He had already found the relevant content from the large manual of the virtual brain system. Even though it was a bit too simple, he was still brimming with confidence after studying it seriously and putting it into practice. He demonstrated it in front of Ruewen. To put it bluntly, this is a simulator. Frost River reality. No, it's closer to the burner simulator, or the simulation effect of the psychic wave network. After all, you're separated by a layer. At most, you're watching a 3D movie. But in my perception, it's already quite realistic. Luonan erased the original image on the front interface of the device as he spoke. After a few jumps, an even simpler and clearer pure text interface appeared. There were many options and their corresponding explanations. Luonan translated for Ruewen. Truth be told, using the secret text of the word me, to sense it was impossible for him to be confident and elegant. He could only make do with it. This is the level selection page of the simulator. There are a total of 4 options. Each one corresponds to a different level and mode. However, they aren't in the simulator. They're in the simulator itself. First, we need to understand one thing. Even though we're looking at a simulated simulator, it's only simulating one of the simulator's forms. To be more precise, it's the lowest form. Do you understand? Ruewen thought for a bit. She extended her finger and tapped on the simulator interface in the virtual projection area. There was a column of text at the very top. If you choose this option, it will be a beetle. If you choose another option, it will have a different appearance. This is the principle. It's like a transformer, but it's tens of thousands of times more complicated. Luonan extended his hand to touch Ruewen's finger. He tapped on the first option as well. I named this option Brain in a Jar in accordance with Earth's language habit. Chapter 881. Just listening to this name is enough. As for the effects, I just said it. There's no essential difference from the ones on Earth. It's just a mechanical instrument. It builds a limited space. In the extreme, you just need to soak a person's brain inside. It mainly targets the body and soul framework of humans or other higher intelligent life forms, especially the brain and nervous system. Through electrical signals and other stimuli, it deceives the sensory neurons and creates a fake environment for people. Of course, it suffers from many restrictions. Even if it uses digital technology to construct a virtual physical system, it will only be an imitation of the local laws of space and time. In essence, it is only an illusion that acts on the brain. Some even require the active cooperation of the participant. It's clearly impossible to use this model in actual combat. At the very least, I have no way to install a virtual helmet on the heads of extraordinaries. Luonan said a cold joke, but Ruewen didn't know how to cooperate. Her expression was serious but calm. Ahem, but the advantage of this emulator is that it's a relatively good editing tool. As long as there's enough data, as long as the data is sufficient, the computing power is sufficient, and there's also the power supply. It can edit a very good setting and even a script. It can create a virtual Earth or even the universe. Theoretically, it is feasible. On a smaller scale, it can be used for ordinary games and training. On a larger scale, it can be used as a higher-level simulator to perform deep calculations and deductions. The most important thing is that if there is a script that has already been edited by someone before, it can be stored and used on the spot. Luo Nan extended a finger and soon brought up the front interface. He brought up the image of a certain planet that he had personally experienced. It was the background setting of the offline test question. This script is quite amazing. It's extremely close to reality. It belongs to the reality of that higher civilization. It can be used as a reference, but it's just a reference. It can't be used alone. The plot of the exam script is too obvious. It doesn't seem like a normal plane waiting to be excavated. Luckily, there are many choices within the downloaded offline test module. I need to synthesize them. Rui Wen knew that the reference Luo Nan spoke of was referring to the misty haze-like projection illusions outside. The elements were quite complex. It looked like Luo Nan had already begun experimenting in this area, but the results weren't clear. Luo Nan could see part of Rui Wen's thoughts. He continued to explain awkwardly, "There's really nothing I can do about it. My sandwich domain was created by compressing and piecing everything together. It wasn't easy for me to achieve a balance, but that was only an approximate solution in an ideal situation. It's just like the mathematics questions you're learning now. The formulas and constants used are all limited to practice and exam conditions. They don't take into account the real parameters of the material world. Don't expect to come up with anything convincing on this basis. However, if we don't care about the authenticity of the material plane, its settings are quite sufficient. The one outside, Captain Jimmy, is currently trapped in the script. I've even mixed a lot of elements into it. Coincidentally, he's implanted a very high-level dynamo core, so he can help test it out. The prey that was trapped in the spider's web and sleeping very lightly? Rui Wen understood. She looked seriously at Luo Nan and nodded seriously. Luo Nan couldn't help but extend his hand to stroke the little girl's hair. He enjoyed the smooth sensation of her hair, and at the same time, he justified himself. The current situation is much better. I can utilize an extremely abundant amount of computing power resources. I can optimize things from before. But it's still a domain, after all. I can casually optimize and reorganize it. If something goes wrong, I won't even have time to cry. That's why I need to find a simulator first. The circle outside, aside from being used to deceive people, is also used for this purpose. Oh, low-end ones won't do. Let's continue. Luo Nan didn't linger on this topic. His fingertips repositioned the front interface and slid down to the second topic. Let's call this topic Spacetime Fault for the time being if we translate it. The materials used for this simulator are quite high-end. I still don't really understand it, and I can't translate it well. It's probably called Spacetime Silhouette? But we have a ready-made example. Do you still remember? You were sleeping at the time, but you should have heard many people talk about it. It's President Ouyang's logic world. Rui Wen nodded slightly. She really did hear people talk about it. At the time, Ouyang Chen intercepted a certain crowded commercial center area of Xia City. He drew a boundary, separated space and time, and formed a world of his own. In one fell swoop, ability users and ordinary citizens were separated, and he thwarted the terrifying actions of a crazy first ablatum of the Order of Justice. Although the enemy Ouyang Chen dealt with at the time couldn't be considered a true powerhouse, this sort of method was still one of the most astonishing and absolutely brilliant performances since the era of distortion. Let's say all streams return to the origin. President Ouyang's logic world can be said to echo with a simulator of this level. Even though the specific methods and applications are different, the core train of thought is relatively the same. It mainly targets the structure of space and time itself, through a precise grasp of the local laws of space and time, and of course, there's also the extremely powerful bidirectional interference force and interference techniques on the mental and material planes to extract a certain silhouette fragment of the entirety of space and time to construct a world that originates from reality, yet surpasses reality. Back then, Luo Nan had watched the entire process in a pure observation mode. Now that he was talking excitedly, he wanted to use the external domain environment to construct the structure of the logic world from back then. He wanted to recreate the battlefield at Frost River Reality's flagship store. As expected, it was burnt before it could take shape. This time, Luo Nan wasn't embarrassed. The degree of rigor of the logic world's structure and the inconceivable details filled in under this rigor. Even though Luo Nan's experience had increased by 100, 1,000 times, he had never seen a second logic world like this. President Ouyang was able to accomplish this. Aside from his profound attainments, he relied to a considerable degree on the psychic wave network that covered Xia City. He also relied on a high-precision grasp of the network's coverage environment. It was impossible to successfully recreate the logic world based purely on impressions. Plus, although the logic world was good, it wasn't practical for Luo Nan. Consumption is one aspect. Due to this method, what is intercepted is an instantaneous fragment of the local spacetime, forming a fault. The logic world itself is affected by the interference of space and time. The structure's space and the time it can be maintained are limited. I've heard you mention that President Ouyang normally uses this method to conduct some relatively dangerous experiments or to conduct some short-term simulations and deductions. This is the effect of a simulator. But to be honest, using it to deceive people isn't too easy. Rui Wen nodded in approval. Luo Nan's finger slid to the third option. Dang 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 dang. Here comes the important point. For this option, let's call it making something out of nothing for the time being. No, let's call it a rule puzzle. Chapter 882. Luo Nan continued to follow the order of interpretation from before. After translating the options, he pointed out the materials used for this level of the simulator. This is easier to translate. It says that the raw materials used for processing are the space and time we reside in itself. Even though he had already experienced it once, suddenly speaking such big words gave him a very reckless feeling. Rui Wen didn't laugh. She had an appearance that made sense. Luo Nan felt that he couldn't stay calm anymore. He could only cough once to wipe away the awkwardness that had arisen once more. He also maintained his elder brother's dignity and continued to operate on the front interface. Luo Nan was different from just pointing at the first two items. He opened the third item's secondary interface. The first item was densely packed with explanatory text. There were a few complex diagrams mixed within. There were also formulas and the like. Luo Nan had already researched this before. The large sections of explanatory text here weren't very friendly to a half-baked translator like him. They also exposed his shortcomings in the area of pure theory. This wasn't something that could be made up for in a short period of time. So he quickly skipped over it and entered the more complex, continuously changing, and completely unfixed graphical interface. What you see right now and what I perceive in the system are actually two different things. Just like how the material world we see is not the same thing as true existence. I can use my mental senses in the system to capture even more dimensional structures. What appears before our eyes is just a projection of one end of the complex structure of space and time. You should understand this. Rui Wen really did understand. Her intuition regarding the structure of space and time even surpassed Luo Nan's. She was able to estimate the approximate panoramic view, after looking at one end for a long time. Inside, it was a mess. Luo Nan was immersed in this chaotic scene. He was even a bit intoxicated. A three-dimensional life form possessed a pseudo-three-dimensional vision structure and an illusory spatial imagination. Only a character like Luo Nan, who possessed an extremely powerful mental sense ability, could view the structure of space and time with this material foundation. The more he could do it, the more he could feel the endless mysteries and beauty within. A direct observation of the structure of space and time. Just this sort of simulation is already a huge gain. Luo Nan's attainments in the configuration of space and time could already be applied to actual combat. He had gone through the 100-year sequence and the additional questions to verify that he had indeed reached a considerable level. However, the anatomical diagram presented in the simulator was still quite shocking. Every time he observed and sensed it, he would have a brand new experience. In comparison, the real local space and time was so vast that there was no end to it. The mist maze, on the other hand, was too broken. That was just a simulation. What kind of splendid scene would it be if the real space and time were dissected into this? Yes, in order to create this simulator, the basic requirement is to dissect the local spacetime, cut the complete spacetime into suitable materials, and reassemble it with the method of configuration, changing the rules and laws. In fact, once it is cut, it is the change of nature, and all kinds of changes are contained within. Luo Nan spoke of these things as if he were cutting a cake. However, time and space were ever-changing, and the laws were hazy. It was hard to change. It was not some plasticine that could be molded however one wanted. One had to have the awareness of competing with the vast universe. Even someone as strong as President Ouyang had to rely on the foundation of the psychic wave network, utilizing multiple conditions on the mental and material planes to realize the masterpiece of the logic world. For instance, the powerful thought process of erasing the old rules and scribbling new rules required the support of a powerful bidirectional interference force between the material and the material plane, an extremely brilliant interference technique, and a spacetime configuration design ability that far exceeded the standard. No matter how enormous Luo Nan's accumulated soul strength was, no matter how much power the altar's spiderweb had, it was impossible to forcefully bend the local space and time to complete a precise configuration. This was despite the fact that the simulator guide already had the basic blueprints and operating procedures. But he had indeed found a shortcut by using such a relaxed tone. He didn't need to forcefully distort, cut, or dissect the structure of spacetime because he had substitute materials. He had an inexhaustible supply of them. We have the mist maze. Luo Nan's voice seemed to be refracted and reverberated within the trillions of domain fragments. These fragments are a bit finer, but they are essentially no different from the structure of spacetime. I can completely use the sandwich domain to infiltrate and guide them in. Not only can I arrange and combine them at will, but the rejection is also extremely low. As long as I have patience, I can form something from nothing, from small to large. When pieced together bit by bit, I can completely form my own unique rules of spacetime. He even gave an example in order to increase his persuasiveness. For instance, the 70 Format Research Institute. Wasn't my mother piecing together bits and pieces of domain fragments? Of course, she should have done some dimensionality reduction processing. The area she assembled isn't a particularly standard structure of spacetime. There's a bit of a discontinuity to it, but there are many details that are worthy of in-depth research. We need to properly refer to them. Those thieves only took away the equipment, but they left the most valuable wealth in place. They can't take it away, right? Luo Nan didn't wait for Ruiwan to respond. His eyes sparkled, and he spoke faster and faster. There's also that Luo Yuan, the fellow who claims to have some secret dealings with the goddess of fate. Even though he didn't admit it, there's a 99% chance that he's in the depths of the mist maze. It's also possible that we haven't explored the edge zone yet. He monopolized a domain fragment with an enormous volume, becoming the capital for his fortune. We don't need to evaluate his luck and methods, but we can completely learn from them. Who knows how long it'll take to piece together a dimension that everyone is satisfied with. But if we have a better foundation, have a deeper understanding, and then make up for it, won't the efficiency be greatly increased? Luonan had already pondered over this idea 1,000 times in his mind. His train of thought was already extremely clear. All of this was built upon his control over the mist maze. It was precisely with the mist maze and his mother's research notes that he was able to start with the most basic configuration and experience the marvels of spacetime configuration. And the deeper he grasped this technique, the stronger his control over the mist maze became. From this, an unstoppable virtuous cycle was formed. This was the precious wealth his parents had left him. It was something he would never be able to fully use in his lifetime. Luonan never believed that he was some sort of genius. Most of his current accomplishments were built upon the foundation of his grandfather and his parents' generous gift. He understood this point clearly, and at the same time, he had more reason to utilize this wealth to the extreme. Luonan pulled Rui one to turn around to look at the surroundings of the lens. There was a ring of fluctuating nebula that was faintly fluctuating. The flashes of the stars seemed to become exceptionally bright and clear within the glowing mist. Chapter 883. Ruewan understood without Luonan needing to explain. As mentioned before, although the lens was the main body, the most core creation, every shining star in the surrounding nebula was a rarely seen creation of the laws of the misty labyrinth. They were all marked with relatively large structures. Picking out the cornerstone fragments from within was undoubtedly the most efficient choice. Sure enough, Luonan spread his arms wide and used rather exaggerated movements to gather this incorporeal glowing mist. Next, we need to explore between these stars and find a suitable home. Ruewan let out a light yep in response. Perhaps if Luonan was a bit colder, Luonan wouldn't need to take out such exaggerated actions to tease a child. Maybe he would go from bad to worse. It was rare for Ruewan to be a bit absent-minded. When she turned her gaze back, she saw that Luonan was already switching interfaces, preparing to enter the substantive program. Could she have missed something? Then, what about the fourth item? The fourth item. Oh, I forgot to mention it. Luonan's expression was a bit downcast. But there's nothing much to say. It's not that it's not important. It's just that we don't need it for now. I call this item the celestial landscape. You can say that I'm using Grandpa's formatting theory as a footnote. Many of the basic theories inside are related to the interaction between heaven and earth and the self-format. It should have a corresponding relationship with the extraordinary domain that we're used to talking about. It's just that I didn't explain it too clearly. The corresponding simulators are all auxiliary designs, but the requirements to use them are off the charts. I haven't studied them thoroughly yet. Ruewan let out an oh and didn't say anything else. Just at this time, a window of information belonging to the virtual brain system popped up on the current interface. It made a new notification and Ruewan saw it. There's news. It's about data loading. Oh, the progress is quite fast. The efficiency of the cloud biological brain array is exploding. The meaning of the new notification was roughly as follows. Sequence 1 data loading complete. Automatically loading sequence 2. Completed low-end network preloading. Officially loading in progress. Luonan knew that the so-called sequence 1 was the data related to the sunwheel hell that had settled within the spiderweb. An enormous amount of information and noise were mixed together. Luonan tossed and turned for several days, but the analysis progress was still extremely slow. But Luonan erected a statue of a god atop the altar's spiderweb, realizing the integration. Under the support of powerful computing power, the progress bar was pulled to the bottom in the dozen or so hours. As for sequence 2, Luonan recalled earnestly for a moment before remembering. This was from the disciple of veteran hand, Wu Li. Luonan had linked the question board in his hands to a certain data center in Ban City. Luonan had finally collected this information. The source should be a part of a large data collection project of a large power. In the modern information society, this type of database also had an explosive amount of information. It was time to make good use of it. Sequence 2 data loading complete. How many seconds? 2? Luonan was a bit stupefied. The difference in mass. Did it need to be that obvious? Of course, from the information provided by the system, the external neuron had already been downloaded from the data center before it was officially loaded with sequence 2's information. It was likely that the external neuron had already copied the entire set and was only now officially loading the analysis. This avoided the limitations of the Earth-level data center hardware, and with intelligent idle operation, it created a stunning effect. But no matter what, Luonan was reminded by the intuitive comparison of over 100 hours and 2 seconds. Compared to the flood of data from the Sunwheel Extreme Prison, the reserves of the Earth-level data center were on a completely different level. The Sunwheel Hell was impossible to quantify, but Sequence 2's massive amount of data allowed Luonan to estimate an approximate value range. Using this reasoning, Luonan seemed to have underestimated the computing power gathered by the Alter's spiderweb and the ability level of the brain array formed from it. This kind of ability really exceeded his expectations. 5 days ago, the Wraith sign pulled the Alter's spiderweb with the help of the daytime nightmare. It planted a hint in the subconscious of billions of living beings across the globe that were affected, establishing a connection. Luonan never asked for it, nor did he expect it to do anything through this connection. He just allowed it to exist and be used. But when Luonan and the true god and pope of the Amaterasu order battled across space, creating a scene of a falling sun and a fortress in the clouds, Luonan's weight in the entire system immediately increased by tens of thousands of times. A flash of light turned into an echo. Among these billions of living beings, the telepathic responses of the hundreds of thousands of ability users, who had already climbed to higher levels of the evolutionary tree, had already caused considerable interference to Luonan. For the sake of sorting out the chaotic echoes and not affecting his own state, Luonan used his own perfect body as a standard to establish the image of a god. This was tantamount to establishing rules for the Alter's spiderweb. Since then, Luonan's chaotic expression had directional feedback, and the brain array of the brain array in the cloud had set up its basic structure. There was, without a doubt, a great deal of potential to be excavated within. Luonan's statue of God only supported the most basic of feedback. It was just as he said to Ruewan. He didn't even understand the core structure, let alone anything else. Luonan was able to realize a leap in computing power. On one hand, it was abundant to the point of overflowing computing power. It was similar to an exhaustive method, forcefully piling up efficiency. On the other hand, the Alter's spiderweb led by the Wraith sign and the external neuron planted deep within the brain seemed to possess a basic framework for utilizing this resource. Luonan was at best a person who used tools. This was great. It wasn't like Luonan truly viewed himself as an omniscient and omnipotent god. He had domains that he was good at. Of course, he had domains that he wasn't good at. For the latter, the most practical consideration was obviously to utilize tools. The sudden increase in harvests did not disturb Luonan's established train of thought. Instead, it raised his expectations a step further. He had wanted to experience the large data processing capabilities of the virtual brain system. Now was the time. Luonan's fingertip swiped across the interface in front of him. He did not directly enter the rule jigsaw puzzle. Instead, he first clicked on the brain in a jar. Before developing a large construction project, he needed to make a solid design blueprint. After a series of operations on the secondary interface, the simulator of simulations gave feedback. Do you want to activate automatic editing mode? The simulator we are using right now is actually a virtual machine. Calculations on the pure data level are not needed. The external neuron is already hard enough. Let's begin now. Luonan's mouth did not stop. It was as if he was reminding Ruewan, but it was also as if he was encouraging himself. Then, he clicked on the virtual button without a doubt, entering Brain in a JAR's automatic editing mode. The interface suddenly went black, but soon, glimmering text and information appeared section by section. Model, Inner Universe. Version number, Great Sovereign Level Basic Exploration Model 2. 7. Authorized Production Department, Heavenly Abyss Empire's 17th Equipment Department. Authorization time limit, permanent. To explore the gap. To pay for shame. To live for the past, Jean Yong. Who was Jean Yong? Luonan could only guess that this was a name. He should be a character of great status in this high-level civilization. It was just that his words were a bit dull. The automatic editing mode settings came one after another without waiting for Luonan to ponder further, unable to connect to the Heavenly Abyss Spirit Network. A valid data source has been discovered. Do you want to automatically import external data? Luonan, who had already read through the relevant instructions, did not even think. He simply clicked Confirm. Chapter 884. It was the 12th of May in Ban City. This day seemed especially long. In the eyes of relevant people, this day had been divided into many events from morning to night. Ever since the Fusang Divine Tree System covered Ban City, experts from all walks of life took turns. There was no need to mention people like the Pope and Mr. Mo. There was also a high-level extraordinary-level conference. Including the observers, there were close to 100 participants, and any one of them was a big shot. Normally, these participants would be the focus of attention and analysis by various intelligence agencies. Intelligence personnel would hate to stare at their crotches and see the color and quantity of their farts. But today, the vast majority of people here were just there to cheer the crowd, but they still couldn't be underestimated. There was a huge amount of information, but it was also mixed with a huge amount of noise, forming a huge amount of data that tormented all kinds of professional intelligence analysts. Many intelligence agencies around the world were prepared to work until they died. It couldn't be helped. It was better than making a wrong judgment and causing a world war. In comparison, Deep Blue and the Apocalypse Laboratory, hidden in a certain region of the Deep Blue world, had their own intelligence analysis team. They were willing to spend money, and they had the advantage of being the first contact that others couldn't get. But they also spent the most effort on this. It had been 15 hours since Mr. Mo left the public site. The analysis team that had been temporarily assembled by the two laboratories was still working intensely. Bald Jeff gulped down his 5th cup of coffee, stepped on an electric hoverbike, and temporarily left the research lab. No one cared about his actions or whereabout. In the face of heavy analysis and research work, even raising their heads was a burden they couldn't bear. Jeff didn't go too far. He randomly found a communications room that could communicate with Earth's spacetime. He didn't care if he was being monitored or not. He just turned on the Transworld communication system, and soon, a 3-way communication was established. The projection showed the upper body of a person. On Jeff's left was Director Mao, who had appeared at the extraordinary conference. He was the spokesperson of Quantum Corporation in the inner world. And on his right was his biggest financial backer, Wang Yu. She was the head of a certain great clan with unfathomable influence in the political, military, and business world. She was the head of the Jade Review Association. Although Bald Jeff was the leader of the Deep Blue Laboratory and had always been arrogant, compared to these two, there was an insurmountable gap in status. There was an insurmountable gap in status between the two of them. The only thing he could do was to adopt a businesslike attitude and report the latest situation. The current situation is intermittent, but there are still signals coming through. The accumulation of information was quite effective. Currently, they were trying to reconstruct the possible environment of the other side based on the feedback of the signal. They were also trying to determine the relative position. No one knows if it's real or not. At the end of the day, distinguishing between the real and the fake is the most important thing. I think that if we want to figure out where the new plane is, we should ask that Mr. Mo directly. That way we can have a straightforward answer. As he spoke, Jeff couldn't help but mutter a lot of things. He expressed his opinion, but his words were also mixed with emotion. Neither Wang Yu nor Chairman Mao answered Jeff's complaints. Instead, they asked after digesting the relevant information. The one who asked the question was Director Mao, who was still dressed in a flowery shirt. His question was slightly more radical. Do you have a basic judgment of the intersection of time and space? I mean Levi, what was his judgment? Band City? North or south of the coastline? Land or sea? I didn't hear any judgment. No. Director Mao narrowed his eyes. The bloodline and the excavation mission are his treasures. He can't wait to fill them with resources. Everything is laid out in front of him. Why isn't he saying anything? Bald Jeff shrugged. I haven't seen him for 7 or 8 hours. Last time, it seemed like he was still paying attention to Xia City. I'm not too clear about the specifics. Xia City. Director Mao muttered. On the other side, Wang Yu just smiled, watching Director Mao and Jeff communicate. Director Mao relied on his understanding of Li Wei to make a judgment. Circling around Xia City all the time. Is his attitude conservative, or does he have a plan? No one answered him. Director Mao wasn't here to perform a one-man show. He pulled Wang Yu along, ignoring the surveillance, and opened a cross-border communication channel. In addition to understanding the information, he also needed to have a clear attitude. So, he suddenly changed the topic. He didn't even care about the awkwardness. Speaking of having a plan, Wang Yu, you're taking your time. Are you still planning to hold the high seas auction? Wang Yu was still smiling, but her tone was very certain. Of course. There are even more people looking forward to it. Really? Mr. Mo can't figure it out. From Luonan's perspective, there might be unexpected harvests. Quite a few people think so. Luonan, it's time to mull things over. Also, Director Mao, your extraordinary conference played beautifully with the adjournment, but it stifled people quite badly. I heard that quite a few people believe that the conference will resume on the day of the auction. They can invite the parties involved to have a detailed discussion face-to-face. Perhaps they can reach an agreement on cooperation on the spot. Director Mao laughed. It's also possible that a world war will break out on the spot. That's why it's in the high seas region. No. It's too close to my vacation island. Wang Yu made small talk. This is a major event related to the new plane. Director Mao, it's unjustifiable for you to hold the idea of staying out of it. It seemed like a casual conversation, but it involved an extremely serious core. As for how serious it was, the two people participating in the conversation had different understandings. Director Mao also made small talk. He led the change of topic. Speaking of the new plane, there's also Xia City. I've reminded you. There's a matter. Oh. Wang Yu maintained her smile. A sudden inspiration would not appear so openly in this kind of conversational setting. The other party must be referring to something. Sure enough, Director Mao soon snapped his fingers. Your side recently funded a research project. I think it's called something called Comparison of Aberrant Ecology. The preliminary conclusion is quite eye-catching. Aberrant ecology? Wang Yu pondered for a moment and nodded. There's something like that. However, I'm just one of the natural sponsors. I'm a private investor. On the other hand, Quantum Corporation is the institutional sponsor. The ratio is quite impressive. I'm not sure about that. Why don't you tell me about it? Wang Yu's smile deepened. The specific content is a comparative study of the ecology of the volcanic region southwest of Spring City and the wilderness surrounding Xia City. The research itself is fine, but the most eye-catching part is that a bold conjecture was made on the basis of the research. I'm not sure if the conjecture can be verified or not, but it's very much in line with my common sense and aesthetics. It's just as the beautiful lady who gave the report said. A wheel, a giant wheel, has rolled over the space-time we are in. The rear wheel is in Spring City. The front wheel, Xia City, has already heard the sound of thunder,